G'day, mate. 40 here. Do you remember Cassidy Hutchinson? She was a star of the January 6th hearings, and she's back in the news. All right, so an aide to the Speaker of the House of Representatives has advised against a Hutchinson subpoena over concerns about lawmakers' sexual texts. So Cassidy Hutchinson gave all this negative reports, all this negative testimony about Donald Trump and his administration at the January 6 hearings. And now we have the Republicans looking to investigate the investigators of January 6. And there's some evidence that Cassidy Hutchinson was coached in her testimony, that she may not have given accurate testimony. So now an aide to House Speaker Mike Johnson has advised Republican colleagues against subpoenaing former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson as part of their investigation of the January 6, 2021 attack to prevent the release of sexually explicit texts that lawmakers sent her. Right, so this investigation is part of an effort by President Donald Trump and his allies to seek retribution against perceived political enemies, including those who investigated his role in the Capitol attack on January 6. So senior aides conveyed to Representative Barry Loudermilk, Republican of Georgia, members of his staff, that issuing a subpoena to Cassidy Hutchinson and asking her to testify under oath serve as another opportunity for her to retell her story and to potentially embarrass the Trump White House. Has the potential for public disclosures of sexual texts from members who are trying to engage in sexual favors with Hutchinson. So who's providing who here with sexual favors? I presume it's Cassidy Hutchinson who's supposedly providing these sexual favors. Now, there's some very curious wording in the Washington Post. In the middle of 2022. So, very wise man.
G'day,
talked
mate.
about this.
40 here. So, are you curious about what political reporters know about Cassidy Hutchinson, but just won't tell you? Seems like there's a widespread belief among political reporters in Washington, D.C. about how Cassidy Hutchinson enjoyed her meteoric rise to the top. But they're just not telling you. They'll hint about it to you, but they just won't say it out loud. And it's the obvious thing. How does a young woman with no experience achieve an unprecedented meteoric rise to the top of power in the Trump administration? Enjoyed her. And they keep hinting about it, but they won't come out and explicitly tell you, because you're just not worthy of finding out what's really going on. And so what's really going on is the Tracy Flick character, played by Reese Witherspoon in the movie Election, which was based on a novel. The movie came out in 1999. And this young woman made these very strategic alliances with older men who she would sleep with and then discard. And the Washington Post is effectively telling you this, but they're not saying the quiet part out loud. But it doesn't take a genius to read between the lines to twig what's really going on. And there's an interesting dynamic here. When you put them on the spot and ask them about it, they'll say, I just can't talk about it, or worse to that effect when asked to comment on her. But it's widely believed by political news reporters in Washington, D.C., that the way she achieved her meteoric rise to the top at age 23.
And I released this scintillating video July 1, 2022.
24, how she became known as Chief Cassidy wasn't purely because of her excellence in her job skills, right? Like, how do beautiful young people achieve meteoric rises in importance when they form alliances with older men? It's not just bonding over common values. It wasn't because the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, was so impressed by her perspective on Social Security or on the child tax credit or by her wisdom about dealing with COVID. So Cassidy Hutchinson was about to turn 24, and she was already a key official at the White House. This was the Washington Post story earlier this week. She enjoyed a meteoric rise from obscurity. Right? What you have to do to achieve a meteoric rise from obscurity and you're a beautiful young woman. Right? She doesn't have any particular skills that would account for her meteoric rise from obscurity. So the news media is effectively telling you that this young woman, enjoyed a rise to the top based on her relationship with Mark Meadows, and it wasn't just a purely platonic relationship with Mark Meadows. All right, she got in with this older guy, and she connected at a very deep and intimate level, and that's why she rose to the top. But it's just curious that they don't want to tell you this. Right? So she had this dramatic testimony. Right? So what kind of young woman, she's just 25, so what kind of young woman can manipulate the levers of power, right? Knows how to stroke the levers of power, knows how to work her way up the greasy pole to the top of power, right? What type of character is able to provide such riveting, dramatic testimony against the people that she had at one time embraced? Right? It's a certain mercurial quality of a Tracy Flick character in the movie Election, who gets in with people, gives them what they want. Now, what do older men want from beautiful young women? Adoration, right? That certain look in the eye. It's like, oh, wow, you're so amazing. Wow, I'd just do anything I could to show you how amazing you are. Right? The older men get, right, the more they want that certain look in the appreciation. Like, oh, wow, you're so amazing. The more they want someone to look up to them. The more they want gratitude, particularly when it's expressed in a very visceral, concrete, and physical manner. Right? So she's a player, right? She's an adventuress. Steve Saylor came up, he didn't come up with the term adventurous, but he's been hammering on with the term adventurous. So who is the adventuress? It's usually a beautiful young woman, and she knows how to get ahead. Look, we're talking about a Kamala Harris type character. How did the Vice President of the United States get her start in politics? She served Willie Brown in a variety of positions. Kamala Harris got her beginning in politics as Willie Brown's mistress. Right? She was adventurous. So this is probably the best description of Kamala Harris. This is Steve Saylor making the point. Adventurous would be a good description of Kamala Harris's fabulous career. It's not that she has particular skills that are just so amazing. She's unpopular. People don't like her. She's not particularly adept at politics, but apparently she was very adept in the bedroom. The best and the brightest don't go into politics in Anglo countries usually. Good point, John Smith. Yeah, Kamala Harris learned the hard truths of politics while studying under Mayor Willie Brown. And it appears that Cassidy Hutchinson learned the hard truths of politics while studying under Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. So Steve Saylor talks about, since April 2014, I've been trying to revive the useful old world adventuress, which means a reasonably good-looking, heterosexual woman who manipulates other people into all sorts of drama. Sound like Cassidy Hutchinson? Some of 2014's special brand of craziness, Sterlinggate, Gamergate, now UVA.
Right, so men often think they're getting away with something when they get to have sex with some beautiful young woman, but they often have no idea of the hell that they will pay. And so she got close to the chief of staff, and then he elevated her in power. And then what's happening underneath the news here, under the covers of the news, all right, is that Republicans noticed that Cassidy Hutchinson rose to great power and influence in the Trump White House, serving Mark Meadows in a variety of positions. And they wanted to tap that too. Men love sluts because they think, wow, if she'll sleep with Mark Meadows, she'll sleep with me. And if she'll make a bad decision and go to bed with Mark Meadows, maybe she'll make a bad decision with me. Men notice a woman with tattoos and they think, wow, she's got such terrible judgment with regard to tattoos, maybe she'll make terrible judgments with regard to me. So men sense an opening, and then they will tend to go for it. And this is what happens with Cassidy Hutchinson, who then probably tired of getting effed around by Republicans, from Mark Meadows to Republicans in Congress, and decided, I'm going to screw them back. And that led to her damaging testimony in the January 6th committee.
Yeah, Rapegate, that exploded so jaw-droppingly, revolves around fairly attractive women playing the political correctness card for their own complicated ends. So remember Andrea Dworkin, She announced in The Guardian in 1999 that she'd been raped in her locked and dead-bolted hotel room in Paris after the hotel staff conspired to put a date rape drug in her beverage. Now, this is highly obese, unhappy, not quite right in the head woman. So ever since the Obama campaign and administration revived feminism and other forms of victimism. G'day, Jim. G'day, John. 9:30 p.m. here in Sydney. And you're working hard. Yeah, I miss Coogee Beach, mate. I miss my time in Sydney. So the Obama administration revived feminism and other forms of victimism, and adventuresses have come flocking to exploit feminism and victimism. So victimism is cool again now that we've got a Democrat in power. So attractive women tend to have fewer problems than unattractive ones. But when our society, starting with the White House, relentlessly encourages reasonably attractive women to proclaim themselves victims, watch out. People are hardwired to like and believe attractive young women, so it's pretty easy to be an adventuress, and they can wreak a lot of havoc. And so Cassidy Hutchinson is the star of the hearing. Like, what kind of person is so adept at pushing the right buttons, stroking the right levers of power, like bringing the levers of power to a frothy climax all over national TV in front of millions of people, become the #1 news item? All right,
so apparently I made this video at like 1 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. That's why it looks so disheveled. So come on, hurry up, get to it, 40.
Welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight we are here at the Presidential Palace in...
That's not what I wanted. Where's the bit I wanted?
G'day, mate. 40 here. So I was riveted by Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, like the rest of the American people, just absolutely riveted by her damning testimony about Donald Trump. Did you know that he had a bad temper and that he threw things? And that when his team was told that the January 6th demonstration might turn violent, they didn't immediately shut it down? So Cassidy Hutchinson seems like a truth teller, like very attractive young woman. And I thought, wow, this is just what we need. Right? Here's someone that America can rally behind right now. Right? And then I started thinking, why does she remind me of the Tracy Flick character in Election? So did you see the 1999 movie Election? Do you know about the novel that it was based on? So Tracy Flick is a very ambitious young woman who uses and abuses people. She gets the protagonist's best friend fired after she has a sexual affair with him. And near the end of the movie, she's seen getting into a limousine of a congressman. So what exactly is the Washington Post trying to tell us in this story? Yeah, Reese Witherspoon played the Tracy Flick character. And why am I getting these Tracy Flick, Reese Witherspoon vibes from Cassidy Hutchinson? Right? She's a very attractive young woman. And so how did she get to such a position of power? Right? So she was one of the youngest. She was one of the least experienced members of the White House staff, yet she was effectively operated as the chief of staff. So how did she get there? Now, I'm the kind of guy who believes she got there purely on her own merits, that she was just that formidably organized.
Right, but maybe I'm naive, but you have a 24-year-old woman with no discernible skills who's effectively operating as the White House chief of staff. People who are more cynical than I am are going to start to ask questions.
And competent, and that's why she rose to the top. I hate it when people try to debunk the success of women and just attribute it to their looks. I don't like her forehead to chin ratio, says the chat. I don't trust her. God forbid, God forbid. So Representative Jamie Raskin from Maryland says she's been an unvarnished truth teller. I find her to be an encouraging, inspiring figure because she is so young, and she has not allowed her idealism and belief in government to be jaded and poisoned by the people around her. What a beautiful sentiment. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Now, what is the Washington Post trying to tell us here between the lines? So to give some background, 30 years ago, the Washington Post published a story about George H.W. Bush and how he had this woman who worked for him in many different roles over the years. And the Washington Post published that she served President Bush in a variety of positions. So is that what the Washington Post is trying to tell us here about Cassidy Hutchinson? So she had extraordinary access and inordinate power. Right, some derisively called it Chief Cassidy. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's staff asked White House aides why she was in on legislative meetings. So why was she Chief Cassidy? why was she in on legislative meetings? I believe it's purely because of her hyper-competence and her truth-telling abilities and her courage and her strength to be able to speak truth to power. That's what I think, but I might be naive. So apparently she had a sudden rise to the center of power. Now, I just want to believe this is just because she was so competent and such a strong truth teller, right? Sudden rise. Beautiful young woman has a sudden rise to the center of power. Right? She interned for Representative Steve Scalise and Senator Ted Cruz when she applied for a White House internship. Now, during the first impeachment trial, Cassidy Hutchinson grew close to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Okay, so they grew spiritually close, they grew politically close, they grew emotionally close, they grew physically close. Okay, when the Washington Post says that someone, a young, beautiful woman grew close to an older man in power, come on, I didn't fall off the turnip truck. I wasn't born yesterday, right? So she was then a legislative affairs staffer. So we know that she's an expert in legislative affairs. She grows close to Mark Meadows, and he's named Chief of Staff in March 2020, and he immediately elevates her. So is the Washington Post telling us that she was elevating him? She eventually became his principal assistant. Okay, this is a 24-year-old with virtually no experience, and she becomes the principal assistant to the White House Chief of Staff. But maybe it's just strictly on merits, but this is not how the game usually works. Right, she's given an office right next to the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. She's just a few doors away from the Oval Office. This doesn't happen. Now, maybe it's just purely on ability. So Cassidy Hutchinson is always by Mark Meadows' side. Right? He would always insist that she'd be in the room at all meetings. So there are all these meetings that you would expect to just be principal level or just very small amount of senior staff level, but Mark Meadows would always insist that she'd be in the room. Right? She was largely there to take notes. It was unusual to have a junior aide to either be in principal level or senior staff level, but it was his call, so we deferred to him. But what exactly was the nature of this very close relationship with Mark Meadows? She was viewed throughout the White House as speaking for Mark Meadows. You know what type of people quickly get viewed as speaking for a powerful man? Women who are sleeping with that powerful man. Right? If you're sleeping with a powerful man, people pick up those vibes and they understand that you're speaking for the powerful man. So when she was giving other staff members orders and always saying, Mark wants, or the chief says this, the chief being Mark Meadows. Okay, that sounds like someone in a pretty intimate relationship with Mark Meadows. So Cassidy Hutchinson traveled constantly with Mark Meadows. Okay, traveling constantly with someone, an attractive young woman, traveling constantly with a powerful older man, always by his side, speaking for him, giving orders on his behalf. Right? When people travel, they have far more opportunity to get particularly close with each other. So Cassidy Hutchinson was going on Air Force One. She was answering Mark Meadows' calls. She was getting texts from members of Congress. So key members of the White House who wanted to get a message to Trump or to Mark Meadows would often go through Cassidy Hutchinson. So what is this Washington Post story really trying to tell us? Certain type of woman. It's the adventurous country, but they were not popular. And if you see the movie Cry in the Dark, you hear this trucker talking about effing Adventists. Because Adventists are a much more hospitable place. Like, it's a lot easier to be an Orthodox Jew in America than in Australia. Like, every time they'd walk to synagogue, they'd get verbally harassed. And I've heard stories of like yeshiva students in Australia getting beaten up because they stand out. But when I was back there recently, Australia has become more multicultural, and so there seems to be reporters in and around Washington, D.C. believe they know why Cassidy Hutchinson was so effective at climbing the greasy pole of power. And it had to do with that very intense and intimate connection she made with Mark Meadows. But they just can't come out and say it because it's a hard thing to write about. It's a hard thing to nail down. It's kind of distasteful. I remember I wrote about the mayor of Los Angeles, that his marriage was over, likely out catting about, and that turned out to be exactly right. Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa was carrying on a long-running affair with a newsreader on a Spanish-language TV news channel. And it turned out to be the biggest story in California in 2007. I broke it on my blog. The Los Angeles Times followed up a few days later, getting the requisite denial from the mayor, but it turned out that my story was accurate. This runs against the feminist narrative that if women are given freedom to succeed, they will succeed by their own merits. Yeah, I think pretty much every sane, thoughtful person who is familiar with how politics works or with how the world works realizes that when an attractive young woman, suddenly achieves power and prestige completely disconnected to her actual merits and to her actual quality of work, that it's not purely her competence that is getting her there, right? So she was called Chief Cassidy, right? other staffers had a derisive attitude towards her. What goes on in a workspace where your other co-workers have a derisive attitude towards your sudden ascent to power? It's because it's widely believed that you did not achieve your power and your status through conventional means. You did not achieve it through just working hard and being good at your job, right? Nancy Pelosi staff asked White House aides why she was on legislative meetings. Why did she have a sudden rise to the center of power? Right? How is she so adept at climbing the greasy pole? So during the first Donald Trump impeachment trial, Cassidy Hutchinson grew close to Mark Meadows. Right? She was just a legislative affairs staffer. She was just one among dozens, but she suddenly grew close. So how and why does a young woman suddenly grow close to an older man in power? Because she gives him the adoration that older men want, right? As a man gets older, as he becomes more established, as he has more of a track record to feel proud of, he starts wanting more and more adoration. And often his wife of 20, 30, 40 years is not going to give it to him nearly as readily as his secretary or some.
Okay, this is from June 29,
fairly clear,
2022.
That, they believe that she climbed the greasy pole to power through her close personal relationship with Mark Meadows. Now, Mark Meadows, very happily married man. Apparently, he's been married for 42 years to his wife. So why would he want to play around with a 23-year-old, 24-year-old intern? That's the question. So they have two children together. Now, in his 2020 book, Tim Alberta 2021 book, American Carnage, and Mark Meadows is a good Christian, so why would he stray with some 23-year-old? Tim Alberta wrote that Mark Meadows is the only politician I've encountered who stacks up to a real-life version of Frank Underwood, who's the cunning main character in the show House of Cards. So Washington Post published an extraordinary profile of Cassidy Hutchinson today. Makes her sound like Tracy Flick, who's the Reese Witherspoon character in the movie Election, and who is a very cunning.
So we never got any investigation into who Cassidy Hutchinson really is. So what the hell? Maybe this time around we will. So looking at reaction here on Twitter, taking this story at face value, the story is that there are secret sexually explicit text messages sent to Cassidy Hutchinson from members of Congress that could come to light if she was subpoenaed. But if she had them, why would they only come out under subpoena? She can turn them over to whoever, whenever. Why wouldn't she? She's certainly not shown any reticence about dishing dirt on Republicans in the past. So why now? If she was receptive to them, she might not want them out there, but then it would just be two consenting adults talking explicitly, which isn't a crime. So what's the real story? We never got the real story on the Cassidy Hutchinson relationship with Mark Meadows back when this story first hit the news. So standard way that political figures are paid off are through book deals. So Simon & Schuster published 7 books for Hillary Clinton, and they published the Cassidy Hutchinson book. 7-figure deals provide a perfectly legitimate way to launder money. So the purpose of her 2023 book deal was twofold: to compensate her for destroying her credibility and to hurt Donald Trump's 2024 campaign. So let's have a look at
them to provide more information.
Getting a big book deal.
After reading your book and reading your story and how vulnerable you were and how you were able to recognize some of the faults that you had in the White House, but how you did remain true to yourself. Your moral character really restored mine. Me going back to the committee to back channel with them to provide more information was because I wanted to stay true to my morals and my values. It was because I wanted to be able to confidently say, I upheld the oath that I took to the Constitution, that my loyalty is to my country, it's not to the president.
I was really struck by the way you handled yourself. The maturity really came through.
I truly believe that our government relies on people who are honest and who value their oath to the office over their loyalty to their boss. You reminded me that what we did was important, and it was important for the country, and it was important for history to remember it that way. I have many passages marked in here. The passage that solidified my desire to go back and be forthcoming with the committee. And this passage reads, Butterfield wanted to include more and added, I was, at times, impatient for the truth, and in some strange, deep down, almost subconscious way, I was relieved by having the direct question asked of me by Mr. Sanders. I asked Butterfield if subconsciously he thought Nixon had it coming. Did I feel the truth should come out, he asked, question. Yes, I did. You go on to say, I was really sorry, but on the other hand, there was this disinterested citizen in me. This is going to be a kind of service to the country in some way. That's when my mind, it fully clicked. And it wasn't, I had it framed in my mind that I was turning against Trump, but I wasn't turning against Trump. Trump turned on the country. I was turning back to my country. And reading that gave me so much internal peace with the decision that I had made.
Okay, I don't buy it. I think she was scorned. I suspect Mark Meadows' wife found out about their affair. She was busted somehow. She came to regret her sexual liaisons with various key Republicans, and her way of dealing with it was to speak out against Donald Trump. So I don't buy the cover story that she was afraid that she might be diminishing Donald Trump, but really she was just standing up for the Constitution and standing up for America. So her words don't ring true to me. Her testimony didn't ring true. Yes, I think she was bought off, and I think she was primarily motivated by some sordid sexual thing that she had that enabled her to climb to power. So I'd like someone who knows more to break this story.
Peter Doocy on that wide-ranging signing. Peter.
Yeah, and the newest kind of thing that he was doing was establishing a crypto advisory council. Basically, he's going to have some advisors here at the White House work with Congress on legislation to to kind of create rules of the road for crypto that don't exist right now. When it comes to more traditional monetary policy, though, he said something that we never would have heard from the previous president, whose approach was to leave the Fed alone. He said, Mr. Trump, that he is going to start pressuring the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, but he seems to think that they might come down on their own.
It's just economically works that way. When the oil comes down, it'll bring down prices, then you won't have inflation, and then the interest rates will come down.
And he does see lower energy prices tied intrinsically to lower inflation. He said he's going to ask the Saudis to lower the price of oil. He's also going to ask the Saudis to increase the $600 billion pledge for investment in the United States up to $1 trillion. Something we saw on Tuesday, some CEOs here pledging $500 billion to build new AI data centers. And a feud has erupted on social media between Elon Musk, one of Trump's closest advisors, and Sam Altman, who you see screen right. He is in charge of OpenAI. He used to be a big Trump critic, and Musk came out and said not to believe Sam Altman, that if Altman's here at the White House promising hundreds of billions of dollars, that he should not be taken seriously. However, the president just explained why that's not necessarily the case.
Well, I've spoken to Elon, but I've spoken to all of them, actually. No, the people in the deal are very, very smart people. But Elon, one of the people he happens to hate, but I have certain hatreds of people, too.
That's such an honest response there from Donald Trump. It's so human. So, yeah, I get it. People who say that Donald Trump's the biggest liar who's ever occupied the presidency, but he's simultaneously the most honest and forthright man who's ever occupied the U.S. presidency. Fascinating essay here by a big lefty who writes a thoughtful weekly column for the New York Times. The right is winning the battle for hearts and minds. Right? The full-scale assault by the conservative movement on liberal domination of the nation's culture has begun to deliver key victories. So let's step back a minute. Virtually all our institutions are dominated by the left, with partial exceptions of the military and small and medium-sized businesses. Otherwise, all right, it seems like all our institutions are dominated by people on the left. So back to Thomas Edsall. The right has gnashed its teeth for decades over the leftward tilt of academia, the literary world, the press, television, and streaming video. Well, that is correct. 13 years ago, Rod Dreher published, Yes, Liberals Do Control Culture in the American Conservative. American Conservative is a magazine that started around 2003 to oppose the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and they were absolutely right to do so. By the way, we concluded yesterday's show talking about West Coast Straussians. So who the hell are the West Coast Straussians? How are they different from the East Coast Straussians? So I was looking that up, looking for an essay by Paul Gottfried, and this is what he wrote in 2021. East Coast Straussians are really usually based in Chicago, are politically well to the left of West Coast Straussians. So they're all followers of Leo Strauss. But on the West Coast Straussians, their citadels are Claremont and Hillsdale. So East Coast Straussians are recognizably neoconservatives and increasingly Biden Democrats, while the West Coast followers of Harry Jaffa, who's a devotee of Leo Strauss at Claremont, have joined the populist right. So in theory, West Coast Straussians are theoretically closer to East Coast Straussians than they are to paleoconservatives, but in their reactions to current events, they are much closer to paleoconservatives. So effectively, West Coast Straussians are pretty damn close to paleoconservatives in the way that they react to the world around them. Okay, so yes, liberals do control culture. The hegemony of the cultural left in American popular culture and the resulting epistemic closure. So epistemic means how do we know what we know? So our frames of reference, right, the whole basis for how we determine what is right, what is wrong, all right, is dominated by the left. America's cultural producers are on the left, and this is a major challenge to conservatives. And in a 2013 essay, Sexual Careers in Late Roman America, Rod Dreher, who's a fair dinkum Christian, I think he's Orthodox Christian, says, I believe that there is very little to be saved in our decadent culture, only things to be suffered, endured, and preserved through this present darkness for a more sane age to come. So he recommended the Benedict option, that Christians should largely withdraw from the world. And I think some people, some religious people, are better off withdrawing from the world, but other people are better off participating more in the world. So whether you should withdraw or whether you should insert yourself more into the world, it depends on you. It depends on what you're good at and what greater immersion in the world could do to you, right? Some people are better off withdrawing. Other people are better off getting more deeply involved. So many people on the right, they just stay away from a possible career in academia because they think, oh, that's never going to happen because I'm a conservative and I'm just going to be discriminated against. Here's a conversation among a bunch of conservatives, including David French and host Sarah Isger. Should you go to law school?
It certainly does not mean I mastered it, but
explain to these 1Ls here what corpus linguistics
We're so cutting
is.
edge. We've had a whole podcast about corpus linguistics. Yeah.
Okay, 1Ls means first year law school. There's a terrific book by this thriller of legal, Scott Turow, I believe, on his first year at Harvard Law School. So this is a conversation on corpus linguistics.
Go listen to the podcast. But I would, my nutshell would be, it's almost like a LexisNexis for a certain era of texts. And so you have these databases that will pull up original sources from whatever time period you're looking for. And so if you're doing, Second Amendment argument.
So I missed playing the excerpts earlier where they said if you're going to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court, and at least 6 members of the U.S. Supreme Court are originalist in their interpretation, you should probably understand out of just your own pure self-interest, right, what is originalism? What is this traditional approach to the text of the Constitution?
You can go back and look at how these terms, keep and bear arms, would have been used in newspapers, in statutes, in cases, but around that time to.
So laws just aren't words on a piece of paper. They are understood in different contexts, in different situations. So laws are understood in part by who created them, in what context were they created, what were they responding to, what was their intended ideological intent at the time, and should they be applied the same way right now?
Help you understand how these terms would have been used. But
side note, isn't it odd that any part of originalism would require modern technology to do it?
It certainly makes it easier.
You can't do good originalism without AI.
Right.
Okay.
Like, that's weird.
Yeah. But corpus linguistics is not just an originalist. The cases I've used it on have both been, one was a statute and one was a sentencing guideline. And so, using, looking to how certain terms.
So as the left has taken control of institutions, professionals in particular have increasingly moved left, and the Democratic Party has increasingly become the party of the professionals and their hyper-educated.
Were used at the time those terms were put into the governing text. Helps elucidate the meaning.
So you mentioned a point that I think is really, it's always been very interesting to me about the legal academy, and that is viewpoint diversity or ideological diversity, however you want to phrase it. It seemed to me that if you're going to look at the legal academy versus, say, the humanities in elite education, the legal academy always did a little bit better on having different voices in the faculty, but only a little bit better. There was always a very dominant strain. I remember I was speaking about this issue several years ago to a group of students at University of Kentucky Law School, actually. And I was talking about, well, the legal academy does better than the humanities, but it still has a lot of work to do. And a professor at the school got very angry and was saying the legal academy is quite diverse, and he named all 4 of the conservative professors that he could think of at Harvard and Yale. And I was thinking, if you can name them all off the top of your head, that's not, you're kind of making my point, right? But I feel like things in the sense is that the legal academy seems more open maybe than some of the humanities, but what do you see as the state of openness to diverse points of view?
I do think that there is more openness in the legal academy than in a lot of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences across the country to viewpoint diversity. And I think that that's because there is still an orientation towards argument and debate in law school just by nature of the profession, right? And so it would be very strange if law schools just had a complete absence of contrary viewpoints. That being said, they're not doing great, right? Like it's still the case that the number of originalists or politically conservative law professors at the very top law schools is a very small number, right? Again, you can probably name them all fairly easily, at least the ones that are out and not just kind of quiet about it. And I think that is a real problem, because not only because it just serves those students are not going to be exposed to the best arguments on all sides of a given issue, especially the students who agree with their faculty on the left of those faculties. Those students in particular will not get exposure to contrary viewpoints, and that will inhibit their ability in legal practice to be effective advocates or to go out and just be better citizens in understanding different viewpoints. But it also creates this problem where those schools then feed into the most elite parts of our society. And so those people who themselves don't have a good appreciation for different viewpoints become culture formers and culture makers that reinforce that kind of obliviousness. And that's really destructive, I think, which makes it important, therefore, to have schools like this one, like Catholic University's Law School, where we do have a broad range of different viewpoints represented on the faculty, and where you have all within the ambit of the Catholic mission, but different viewpoints that teach our students different points of view and allow them to be better trained for legal practice.
There also seems to be a real issue, though, of conservatives not wanting to go into academia potentially. And I know there's some chicken and egg, right? If you don't feel welcome, if you don't think you're going to get the job, then you don't apply for the job. But also there was sort of, at least in my time in law school, this stereotype that the liberals were interested in sort of more the low-paid public service and the conservatives were going to go make money. So yeah, they weren't going into academia. They're not thinking thoughts. They're going to go, represent Exxon and club some baby seals. God damn it.
Yeah. So I think that is just a really lame excuse. Like it's the kind of excuse you can tell yourself if you already have a very low opinion of the people with whom you disagree, because you can just kind of dismiss them as not particularly intellectually sophisticated. And I think that the reality is that there are a lot of conservatives who have the credentials and the capability to be great legal scholars who never seriously consider a career in academia because they are just relentlessly sent the message throughout their educational formation that this is not a career for you. Because if you try to go into legal academia, you will face unrelenting hostility. And that kind of message does filter down. So I have so many conversations with so many law students and young lawyers who are interested in academia and in scholarship, where the most of the conversation is just like, is this even really plausible for me because of the barriers I would face as a conservative? And that is just not a conversation that has to happen on the other side, right? On the other side, the barriers to entry to academia are very high for anyone, right? It's a very hard job to get, no matter what your viewpoint is. But they do not, those on the left side of the spectrum just don't have to have those types of conversations about, gosh, what kind of hostility am I going to face, both in getting into the academy, but also if I'm lucky enough to get into the academy, from my colleagues and even potentially from my students, right? And that is something that really does deter a lot of people from going in.
You know, the dynamic, I was looking into some of these numbers after, was it Judge Duncan at Stanford who was shouted down? So I was looking at some of the numbers, and it was saying that the legal profession is to the left of the general public, just by a bit. I mean, the median lawyer is to the left of the just median non-lawyer American. The legal academy at writ large is to the left of the legal profession. Elite law students at quote elite schools are to the left of the legal academy. And then the faculty at the quote elite law schools are to the left of the law students at best schools. And so it just keeps moving more left in sort of your median political view, the more that a school climbs up the rankings. That is kind of mirroring much of the rest of education in the United States. We're now reaching a point where you cannot talk about the college experience as one thing ideologically. If you go to Princeton and you go to Chicago, they're going to be different experiences now. If you go to Columbia.
Okay. Fascinating essay in the New York Times here by Thomas Edsall, essentially saying that the left is losing the war of ideas. Right. And so in a 2012 essay, Sexual Careers in Late Roman America, Rodrea, traditional Christian, says, I believe that there's very little to be saved in our decadent culture, only things to be suffered, endured, and preserved through this present darkness for a more sane age to come. So he recommended the Benedict option of religious people withdrawing from the world. Now, the world that Rodrea has described has changed, radically changed, if not flipped on its head, according to Daniel Dresner, who's a left-wing professor of international politics at Tufts. He was also an early academic blogger, and there was speculation that he did not receive tenure, I believe, at the University of Chicago because he was a blogger. It's considered a non-prestigious occupation for an academic. So in a January 2nd essay this year, Daniel Dresner posed the question, has the right won the culture war? So he says over the last 5 years, the cultural ground has shifted dramatically to the right. While this does not mean that the right is now culturally ascendant, all right, still the left that dominates most of our institutions, does mean that neither progressive nor nonpartisan elites possess the cultural cachet they did even half a decade ago. I believe that's accurate. What has changed is the erosion of the left's cultural dominance. So if it turns out the right controls both the ascendant political and cultural institutions in the United States, that presages a very different next decade than what many were expecting even a year ago. There has been a significant shift to the right in our culture over the past year. So how did this shift occur? So in the last 3 years, for the first time, I'm seeing the right consistently win culture wars. I don't recall this happening before in my lifetime. So first we have, well, that was stimulated perhaps in part by the right saw how it was increasingly getting shut out from social media and the mainstream media. For example, the conservative position on the transgender revolution is that it's caused by mental illness, and this conservative position was banned on virtually every form of social media of which I was aware as recently as 2020, and it was a position that was excoriated in the mainstream media. So where could you go to express traditional conservative views? The right had to develop their own social media. And so when Elon Musk took over X, right, that has led to an explosion of free speech. And with a more even playing field, the right has been winning. So we have an aggressive and opportunistic conservative movement recognizing the crucial importance of new technologies in shaping politics and culture. So I was feeling from 2018 to 2021 that there would just be fewer and fewer, if zero, possibly zero options for live streaming right-wing thought. It just felt like the world was just closing in on us. Social media was closing in on us, that live stream options for open discussion were getting rarer and rarer and less attractive. But the right reacted, recognized the crucial importance of live streaming discussions and podcasts in shaping politics and culture, disseminating ideas, and providing credible analyses of the problems in our society. Then, most prominently, we had Elon Musk, an ally of President Trump. He bought Twitter in 2022, turned it into X. It's a major social media platform where you have free speech. And in reaction to that, YouTube and Facebook have had to reduce their many restrictions on our speech. Trump created Truth Social. I've never used it. Right-wingers have found us at social media sites as Gab and Parler. I've used Gab a bit. I haven't used Parler really. I like Rumble. Gab offers new members the opportunity to join community groups that include Victims of Affirmative Action, Liberal Bashing 101, White Man Wednesday, and Bible Prophecy and Truth. Then there was an article in the left-wing publication Slate last November by Luke Winkie, How the Right Won Podcasting. Conservatives dominate the list of the most popular podcasters. Right, scroll through Spotify's top podcast chart, and at any given moment, at least half of the most popular shows are hosted by people friendly to the MAGA cause, like Tucker Carlson, Patrick Bet David, Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Dan Bongino, Joe Rogan. Members of the reliably liberal podcasting commentariat are few and far between on the charts alongside their opposition. Trump's threats to use the government's regulatory apparatus to punish dissident corporations have brought to heel major technology players that perform an important role in shaping contemporary American culture. So Google, Meta, Amazon, and Apple's Tim Cook each contributed $1 million to Trump's inauguration celebration. So unlike Elliot Blatt, I am glad that big tech is increasingly being friendly to Donald Trump. During a December 16 news conference at Mar-a-Lago, Trump talked about high-tech moguls now seek him out. One of the big differences between the first term, everybody was fighting me. This term, everyone wants to be my friend, said Trump. Tech CEOs are not alone in seeking Trump's favor. Paramount, which owns CBS, is exploring ways to settle a $10 billion lawsuit filed by Trump over the way CBS handled an interview with Kamala Harris. In December, ABC News, which is owned by Disney, settled a defamation lawsuit brought by Trump. The network contributed $15 million to his future presidential foundation, along with $1 million to cover legal fees. So the Trump Republican November sweep had an immediate effect on the partisan balance of power regarding cable news networks, which are crucial players in the dissemination of ideas, values, and beliefs. So the two liberal channels, MSNBC and CNN, have experienced severe declines in viewership after the November election, while Fox News ratings rose. I was surprised by how calm things were in Los Angeles after Trump's decisive election. I expected riots. I expected we would find out No, I did expect that Trump would have a clear, decisive victory that election night. But many people are expecting the electoral contest to drag on through Thanksgiving. So right-wing talking points now dominate discourse in many parts of the world. Right? They are galvanizing voters by focusing on common anxiety about crime, migration, and inflation. Republicans have done a great job of getting out their message through right-wing radio networks, as well as the tabloids and Fox TV and social media. People on the left are agonizing about this, wondering whether they should create alternative media infrastructures. Part of the reason why Republicans are so successful is the message rather than the medium, right? Donald Trump won on substance. Republicans are winning on substance. Right? They are focusing on simple messages on topics that have salience, meaning importance to people. Right? Explaining the nuances of crime statistics and telling people not to worry about crime is not as persuasive when people go daily to CVS and they see all the toothpaste and the aspirin under lock and key, or they feel threatened on the street or the subway. So who are you going to believe? Your lying eyes or what they're telling you on TV? So the tech titans want to avoid regulation and taxation. They have often a libertarian bent, so perhaps it's natural for them to collaborate with Donald Trump. These major tech platforms and AI companies are counting on the United States to stop global regulation. And Mark Zuckerberg said when he would dismantle fact-checking, he said, we need to beat back European regulation. So we've got a Trump-Zuckerberg-Musk alliance that makes sense for big tech right now. So one part of the conservative drive to realign the culture is to control the medium, the websites, podcasts, and messaging systems. Another goal is to discredit and to push back against liberal initiatives and claims and institutions. So no one's been more successful on this score than Christopher Rufo, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and author of America's Cultural Revolution. He's almost single-handedly forced liberals to retreat on many different issues. I can't think of any political activist on the right who's been as successful as Chris Rufo in my lifetime, well, at least in the last 40 years. Rufo can claim credit for the corporate and academic retreat on critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and the environmental, social, and governance, ESG movement in corporate investing. And 2 days ago, Christopher Rufo boasted on X about the rising status of the right in the nation's culture. For the past 4 years, the left has tried to condemn us as fringe, radical, extreme, and worse, but the truth is that we are mainstream, reasonable, popular, and ascendant. We're no longer going to let cluster B leftism ruin our institutions. That's your thing. Try therapy. Wall Street Journal reported January 19 how in sports, entertainment, marketing, displays of conservatism are crowding out progressive postures. Instead of taking a knee to call for social justice, NFL players are doing the Trump dance in the end zone at football games. Mainstream entertainers, such as country singer Carrie Underwood and rapper Snoop Dogg, agreed to perform at events celebrating Donald Trump's inauguration, something that music stars largely shunned 8 years ago. We have a new generation of Trump-friendly comics and wellness influencers on YouTube and other social media. A snippet of audio featuring Barron and Melania Trump has become one of the hottest online memes. Celebrities such as Paris Hilton and brands including Frontier Airlines using it in their TikTok and Instagram posts. Every time I walk on campus, I see a few MAGA hats. That's new. MAGA and conservatism have become intertwined in pop culture. It's showing that conservatism is cool now. Businesses are rolling back diversity efforts. Universities are adapting to the Supreme Court's ban on considering race in admissions. Programs designed to help minority students are under legal attack, facing claims that they discriminate on race. Many Republican-led states officials feel newly empowered to press for Christian-themed curricula in the classroom. Conservatives have long complained that free speech was censored on social media. This month, Meta platform announced the end of fact-checking and restrictions on many types of speech across Facebook and Instagram. So the right is on the attack and the left is on the defensive. All right, back to this podcast discussion. Should you go to law school?
Or you go to Vanderbilt, very different. And that's not even including your SEC schools, which are going to have, again, very, very different. Or your CCCU schools, that's the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. Is the legal academy diversifying to the same extent? And maybe this is a good opportunity to talk about some of the things the Catholic has been doing to distinguish itself. But my sense is that the legal academy is also diversifying itself a bit. It's not one big blob as much anymore.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that there are two kind of tracks to think about. There's the extent to which dominant current institutions that have traditionally been predominantly been served by the left, like Harvard and Yale, Stanford, places like that, the extent to which they hire people with different viewpoints, especially conservatives. And then there's the other question about, well, what about alternative institutions that build up little enclaves for those who are not part of this dominant view?
All right. Colin Liddell has some thoughts on MAGA 2.0. Whoa.
Hello, this is Colin Liddell, and this is the Short Pod, a brief and succinct podcast commenting on the events and issues of the day. And today it is the 23rd of January 2025. It is now 3 days since Donald Trump has been president, so it's enough time to give my impressions of the new Trump administration. Now, Trump is really somebody who evokes a lot of mixed feelings in any reasonably intelligent and nuanced person. It's impossible to be 100% pro or anti-Trump, I think. If you are 100% pro or anti-Trump, then you're probably a bit mad. Now, there's lots to criticize in Trump. First off, this guy is incredibly corrupt. The whole shitcoin thing that he launched on the back of his inauguration is incredibly low class and outright, borderline criminal. The way that he's backtracked on TikTok after having a private discussion with a major investor in TikTok or in ByteDance is also incredibly sleazy. So this guy is, in many senses of the word, a complete piece of shit. But there's also a lot of good mixed in with the bad, it seems. Now, in the first few days, Donald Trump has started implementing what can generally be called kind of common sense policies. This includes attempts to kind of shut down the illegal influx of migrants at the border. I think everybody can see the logic and validity of trying to control a country's borders. He's also trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. This is something that has been abused for centuries now, I would say. He's also trying to roll back the DEI quotas that impact American companies and government departments, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of good common sense stuff coming out of Donald Trump. At the same time, he seems to be taking a rather abrasive approach to America's global soft power. He's pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He's pulled out of the World Health Organization. He's torched America's kind of green credentials. And if the scientific evidence is that there is a man-made global warming crisis underway, that seems a little bit irresponsible, etc. But at the same time, there are real kind of energy concerns that impact on the economy. So maybe he's taken a bit of a kind of short-termist approach, which is what a lot of politicians do anyway. But rubbing up all his allies the wrong way and threatening to invade countries like Panama can have a lot of bad blowback, which shouldn't be underestimated. The case can still be made that Trump is possibly serving a higher master. By that, I mean, he's been compromised in some way or bribed in some way to do the bidding of another country or power. You could say that a lot of his actions are consistent with trying to implode NATO. And also by attempting to redraw national borders, i.e. the annexation of Greenland or the Panama Canal, he has given a green light to other major powers to redraw their borders, i.e. China vis-a-vis Taiwan, Russia vis-a-vis Eastern Europe, etc. So that's a point to keep an eye on. That's a point that people should worry about. And of course, in his earlier life, Trump was exactly the kind of person that the Russians would be liable to gather compromat on, and exactly the kind of personality that would be susceptible to those kinds of operations. But setting that aside, until a smoking gun is discovered, we have to look at the broad parameters of what Trump's doing. And I think the best way to really characterize it or sum it up is that he's offering America a kind of new social contract. And that social contract is in return for relatively, inverted commas, common sense policies on a lot of issues. The American people are being asked to turn a blind eye to all of his corrupt practices, his profiteering, his sheer grifting, and the immense escalation in corruption and bribery that we are seeing. Of course, I'm not saying Trump is the only corrupt politician in America. American politics is full of corruption. But that's the parameters of the new social contract.
Okay, fascinating essay in the New York Times by lefty Thomas Edsall. Let's return to that. So the right is on the attack and the left is on the defensive. And Musa Al-Ghabi, a professor of sociology and the author of We Have Never Been Woke, The Cultural Contradictions of the New Elite, wrote by email in response to my questions. The big story from 2010 on is not Republicans growing more effective at messaging, but Democrats growing increasingly out of step with the median voter as they catered ever more around the preferences of knowledge economy professionals. So in those parts of the country most dominated by Democrats, where political rule is a Democratic Party monopoly, things aren't going too well. Look at Los Angeles and its killer fires. Look at California. Look at New York and Chicago. So one way of understanding the 2016 and the 2024 elections is that it was a struggle between the news story and the comment section. And Donald Trump represents the comment section, and the comment section won. So knowledge economy professionals are those employed in higher education, the media, high tech, the law, healthcare, entertainment, advertising, human resources, information technology, and other fields requiring BAs or advanced degrees. And people in these fields tend to systematically have different political and moral preferences and priorities than most other Americans. So rather than viewing the gender divide, the ethnic shifts, the education divide divides as separate phenomena, it's more insightful to understand them as facets of more fundamental schism in American society, a divide between symbolic capitalists and those who feel unrepresented in our social order. 2 decades ago, a couple of sociologists observed professionals have moved from being the most Republican class in the 1950s to the second most Democratic class by the late 1980s to the most Democratic class in 1996. So doctors, lawyers, accountants, dentists, all right, they now vote Democrat overwhelmingly. And this consolidation at the turn of the century is even more pronounced today. And so these professionals have been consolidated into the Democratic Party. They've grown increasingly progressive, particularly on cultural issues such as sex, race, gender, the environment, and especially relative to blue-collar workers. So each time Democrats lose, they blame the nature of modern communication. Great sentence. Each time Democrats lose, they blame the nature of modern communication. This is in the New York Times, guys. Since Trump was reelected last November, Democrats have lamented that left-of-center donors haven't invested in creating progressive podcasts that could rival the influence of Joe Rogan, ignoring the fact that Joe Rogan's podcast never had such donors. The right did invest in alternative media, such as Rumble. These arguments by Democrats miss the forest for the trees. The reason that Republicans have been more successful in spreading their message is not that they have bigger budgets or that they have smarter staffers. It is that they have been more adept at telling an aspirational story about the nature of America, one that citizens from all kinds of demographic backgrounds find to be convincing. Democrats now in the midst of a deep epistemological crisis. So epistemology, how do we know what we know? So think about Democrats. How do they know what they know? They look at the country through simple categories. For example, by assuming that it can be split into 2 rival blocks of whites and people of color. They talk about life in a linguistic register that most Americans find deeply alienating. Linguistic register meaning the type of elevated academic language where instead of saying that Joe Biden seems senile, instead they say he's suffering from a decline in mental acuity. Instead of saying that's retarded, they say, well, that's developmentally disabled. Most of all, Democrats express themselves with extreme care, lest they inadvertently end up saying the wrong thing. So a mark of being educated and belonging to the anointed class is to use great care with the language that you select, for which there are many advantages to taking care with language so you don't unnecessarily hurt people, but you can end up with a language that is sterile, language that doesn't face up to the challenges of the world that it's trying to represent. Language that seems vastly removed from reality, that is alienated from reality, that's way too abstract and abstruse rather than plain. Americans used to be known as plain-speaking people. Democrats, particularly the professional Democratic class, are the opposite of plain-speaking, and this rubs most Americans the wrong way. Colin says Democrats lose because they pick women candidates who are not there on their own merits. Most people don't like affirmative action, right? Most people don't want to go to a doctor or have an air traffic controller or an airline pilot or anyone who has any substantial influence over their lives who has not achieved his position on the basis primarily of excellence. So among the most damaging developments for the left include the failure of elite universities, bastions of liberalism, to deal with anti-Jewish protests during Israel's attacks on Gaza. The current exodus of reporters, editors, and subscribers at the Washington Post, a mainstay of liberal journalism, the discrediting of academia's commitment to free speech as a result of the disclosure of their cancellation of controversial speakers, the absence of conservative professors in most fields, and the requirement that faculty members file annual mandatory diversity statements. Liberals dominate traditional media and cultural industries, but conservatives more successfully build alternative institutions that are self-consciously ideological and anti-establishment. So there is a bigger audience for self-consciously conservative than liberal media due to perceptions that the mainstream media is liberal. not just perceptions, reality, right? In the elite media, you'd find at least 10 Kamala voters for every one Donald Trump voter. Trying to win the attention of voters, Democrats face at least 2 hurdles because of their increased dependence on voters with advanced degrees. So reading newspapers has both declined in the American country and has become increasingly politicized. So a majority of U.S. adults never open a newspaper or even a news app or a news website. Right? Among people who read a newspaper multiple times a week, about 15% of adults, Democrats outnumber Republicans by more than 2 to 1. The newspapers are a key source of information for Democrats, but not for Republicans. Nate Silver, the liberal polling expert, wrote an essay on Substack in December. The expert class is failing, and so is Biden's presidency. So the more you go left, the more the left wants rule by so-called disinterested experts. The more you go left, the more you find a desire to have the political decision-making taken out of the hands of the people and their representatives and just turned over to experts, right? Communism means rule by experts. Socialism means rule by experts, right? Left-wing governance equals essentially rule by experts, where regular people have less and less influence on political decisions. So Nate Silver says the expert class is failing, and it's Democrats far more than Republicans who embrace experts, and so is Biden's presidency. Democrats are the party of the educated, and it has resulted in what he calls the indigo blob. So what does indigo mean? Indigo. It's a color, isn't it? So it's a term used for the number of hues in a region of blue. The word comes from the ancient dye of the same name, and it's a natural pigment that comes from the indigo plant. It's often used to dye denim. Color can mean tranquility, wisdom, and devotion. Okay. So the indigo blob, according to Nate Silver, it's the merger between formerly non-partisan institutions like the media, academia, and public health, and institutions that draw almost exclusively from the ranks of college graduates, as well as the expressly partisan and political instruments of the Democratic Party and the progressive advocacy groups. So liberalism has become a double failure. Its institutions serve the public increasingly poorly. Look at Los Angeles and the fires. Look at New York and the crime and the dysfunction. It is also increasingly losing politically. If Trump's victory against a Harris campaign that literally ran out of ideas wasn't proof enough of that, people are also voting with their feet. They are fleeing blue states and blue cities. Corporations that embraced wokeness have now done a 180-degree turn. The left is losing the battle of ideas, and the left is the party of intellectuals and academics. So how could the left be losing the battle of ideas, the one thing that it is supposed to win? So we've got rising authoritarianism, economic inequality, political polarization, challenges to democratic norms. This is the essay here by a lefty, Thomas Edsall. And we've got contemporary political debates between left and right that now include ethnic and racial scapegoating, but there are key differences. The presence of robust global institutions, no matter how much Trump hates them, widespread access to information, hard lessons learned from bitter experience. I don't get that. Well, Trump's corporate allies are now lodged throughout the American business community. History has shown that turning points like the one we face can be very dangerous. Once leaders with autocratic aspirations like Trump, as well as his enabler and sidekick Musk, have risen to power, an inflamed ascendant right follows them wherever they go. Where might this end? And that's the end of the essay by the left-wing New York Times columnist Thomas Edsall. Right. Should you go to law school?
Within the legal academy. And the latter is really an example of Notre Dame and George Mason and here, Catholic University, which doesn't mean that those schools only have conservatives or those schools only have originalists. It's just that they are actually more faithful to the true purpose of a university and a law school, which is to recruit people who are the best and who are pursuing the truth honestly, and to expose their students to the diverse range of viewpoints to better equip them for legal practice. And that is actually what all these law schools should be doing. Obviously, Catholic University and Notre Dame have a different component in that we have an explicit Catholic mission, right? And that also affects the kind of community that we're building here. But it does mean that our students get exposure to faculty and to resources that they would not get at a lot of other institutions. And I think in that way are better equipped to go out into legal practice than they would be if they graduated completely oblivious to contrary viewpoints from a lot of other places.
All right, Judge, let's talk law school incentives. You have the U.S. News and World Report rankings. It seems to dominate academia, not just law school academia, but we talk about the T14. They're the only game in town. The T14 refers to the U.S. News and World Report's determination of what the top 14 schools are and why it ended up.
Okay, so there's an old joke about law school students who average an A, they become judges. Law school students who average a B become professors. Maybe it's the other way around. Law school students who average C's become corporate lawyers. Law school students who average D grades become contingency lawyers and out-earn all the rest of them.
Well, WEF just became WTF. The World Trump Forum 47 giving the bug-eating globalists at Davos a good roundhouse kick to the face as he beamed in virtually to address the World Economic Forum. Roll it, Sven.
I'm pleased to report that America is also a free nation once again. There will be no better place on earth to create jobs, build factories, or grow a company than right here in the good old USA. My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. If you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff. I terminated the ridiculous and incredibly wasteful Green New Deal. I call it the Green New Scam. Withdrew from the one-sided Paris Climate Accord.
Yes, but perhaps the best moment came when President Trump browbeat the Bank of America CEO for debanking conservatives, an allegation that he denies.
I hope you start opening your bank to conservatives, because many conservatives complain that the banks are not allowing them to do business within the bank, and that included a place called Bank of America. They don't take conservative business. And I don't know if the regulators mandated that because of Biden or what, but you and Jamie and everybody, I hope you're going to open your banks to conservatives, because what you're doing is wrong.
And a big win for the tariff titan. J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon is seeing the upside of not letting the world rip us off.
Look, I look at tariffs, they are an economic tool. That's it. They're an economic weapon, depending on how you use it and why.
Okay, debanking, it's not because banks hate conservatives. It's because the Biden administration in particular enacted legislation, regulations, incentives, right, bureaucratic interference with their business that strongly incentivizes banks to debank people who do certain things that triggered the Biden administration guidelines, proving to be overall unfriendly to people on the right.
And stuff like that. And, people arguing, is it inflationary and non-inflationary? I would put in perspective, if it's a little inflationary, but it's good for national security, so be it. I mean, get over it.
Ooh. Wow, it was like speaking to Harold. Hey,
and Jamie Dimon's a long-term Democrat.
Jesse, I'm going to use a food analogy.
I'm already hungry.
Isn't Donald Trump like salt? You add it to every meal and it gets better. So you throw him at the WEF and it's like appetizing. It's fun to watch. You're kind of like truffle oil, where you overpower and you ruin every meal.
I was having popcorn with Trump one time, and he took one of those industrial-sized canisters of salt, the ones with like the tin, and he just holds it like a football and pours like a thick, steady stream of salt into this. I couldn't believe it. I talked to one of the FBN anchors in the elevator the other day and asked her about gumshoe reporting, and asked her about Davos, and she said Davos is a dump, Jesse. She said the food's terrible, it's German, and the skiing is mediocre. And I thought it was a junket for her, but she said it's just a mess. And it used to be a place where all these financial elite will go to the biggest tax haven in the world, place where they hid Nazi loot during the Holocaust, and dictate to everybody else what to do. We're not doing that anymore. Globalization is over, and we're taking Davos down with it. Trump went to Davos and dictated to them, boost spending on defense, cut corporate taxes, because he's establishing a new world order. America is no longer duty-free. No more mass migration. D-U-T-Y, Greg. No more mass migrations, no more DEI. There's a new sheriff in town. And it's coming at the perfect time because China's dying demographically. Russia was already dying demographically, and now they're bleeding out on the battlefield. And so Samsung just announced they're moving factories from Mexico to the United States. The Saudis just announced a $600 billion investment here. And so we're flexing our economic muscle just at the right time. This is the new golden age, Greg, so you better buy Bitcoin.
I think I will. But fun fact, Davos was the name of my old masseuse. R.I.P.
Is that
Davos.
a woman or a man?
Hard to tell at this point. It's a closed casket. Hey, Judge, so you know what is kind of amazing about
Okay, should you go to law school? Here's the discussion.
Being 14 that we care about instead of any round number. I have no idea of the history of that. Maybe you do. And so what we've also done then, we've talked about viewpoint diversity, but I want to talk about a different type of diversity, which is just experimental educational diversity, diversity in terms of what you're focusing on. Because if everything is based on U.S. News and World Report and they value X, Y, and Z, the schools are all going to chase X, Y, and Z, right? What's the law that once a measure turns into a metric, it ceases to be a valuable measure anymore? I feel like we must be there and way past there when it comes to legal academia. And so we're basically churning out the same law schools over and over again because of those metrics. And indeed, we've had some, at least one, I'm thinking of, criminal indictment related to trying to game the system and lie about, you know, law schools. I think that was undergrad. I think it was Columbia. So how does that affect legal academia? And what are we supposed to do about it when the money follows U.S. News and World Report because the students follow U.S. News and World Report, et cetera?
I mean, there was a report that a trustee at the University of Florida burst into tears at the decline of Florida's ranking under Vince Sass, like the U.S. News ranking. Like, you've got trustees bawling about this. So how to break out of this prison, Judge?
Well, I guess as a consumer of law school's production, that is law students, I certainly am. You're aware of the rankings, but I don't think that is the be all and the end all.
Okay, where did your 3 law clerks go to school? Let's test this.
Oh dear.
You're not going to spell platitudes to me.
UVA, Yale, and Cornell.
Oh, interesting that those are all in the C14.
That's true.
Cornell's no.
Last year, I had a law student from Notre Dame. I do, one of the things that Justice Thomas is kind of famous for is looking quite broadly and bringing in top law students from whatever the law school is. And
of course, in the reverse, Justice Scalia had the famous line, the schools may not turn a sow's ear into a silk purse, but those top schools are unlikely to turn a silk purse into a sow's ear, so I don't bother to look anywhere else. Like, they're taking the silk purses, right? So like, there might be silk purses elsewhere, but I know these are silk purses, and so that was his.
Okay, what do we got here? Come on. All right, Commentary Magazine crew on Trump immigration. Oh, and Amelia Perez. Has anyone made it through that movie? It's like getting all the awards, and it's about a drug lord who undergoes transgender surgery and becomes a woman, and then starts devoting his life to social justice. Sounds unbearable.
I don't really care what's happening because as we record, the Oscar nominations are being announced, and I would really rather be watching those because I want to get angry at the nominations for Amelia Perez, a disgraceful and awful movie that's going to get a lot of nominations. But I can't because I have to be here with you. So I hope you appreciate the sacrifice that I am making to discuss with you such matters as immigration, the status of Trump.
The only reason I ever would watch the Oscars was if I could get with a hottie. Right? I was willing to watch the Oscars like when I was lying with a young, beautiful, attractive Jewish woman. Aside from that, I'm not interested in the Oscars because I'm not gay.
Nominations and worldwide anti-Semitism. So from the ridiculous to the sublime, here we go. Lot of stuff going on in immigration. Announcements that 350 people have been deported. are either taken by ICE and deported or whatever. 1,500 troops going to go to the southern border, though it's not clear where, what role they will play, or how. Many local officials across the country in sanctuary cities and places of clueless leftist psychosis were announcing their intention to disrupt ICE efforts to enforce federal immigration laws in their cities, with the mayor of Denver, for example, last week saying that somehow the police would prevent ICE. The local police were going to be directed to prevent ICE or to somehow interpose their bodies between ICE and people that ICE was moving on, to which apparently the Trump administration of the federal government vowed to potentially take action because the courts have affirmed the fact that immigration is a national responsibility, that border security is a national responsibility under the National Security Act of 1952, and that this is a federal responsibility. It is not something that
Yeah, I love that the Trump administration is not going to allow local jurisdictions say, oh, we're sanctuary cities.
If it's good for national security. Everybody's coming around. This guy is the leader. They know it, and he owns them.
You know what I like about this, Dana, and I'm sure you will agree because we've agreed with you agree with me all the time.
100%.
He's representing us when he's out there, and it always feels like he's America's lawyer. And so he goes up there, and it's like we sit there and you go, yeah, you know what? He's representing us on our behalf. It's kind of nice.
Didn't you used to call him America's agent?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, so you want your agent to be the guy that has to deal with all of the hard conversations.
Right. So
because he's better at it than you are, because you'd rather not, and I would rather not. But I think it's interesting is this is where you get the elite of the elites, and they all fly in, all the rich people, and they talk about the poors.
Yeah.
And they're feeling so badly for them, except that you have, for example, John Kerry. John Kerry was there with the same message about how we need to end fossil fuels, as if the last 4 years never happened, as if he was not paying attention at all to what was happening. I also, oh gosh, I was listening to this podcast today from the New York Times. Okay, on the energy front, they're like, oh, he's gonna end clean energy, no more clean energy. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that we want to have all the things all the time. We want nuclear, fossil fuels, of course. We can have solar, we can have wind, but not at the expense of the American people. John Kerry was there saying the same old thing. You had one of the CEOs say, it was unfortunate to see the net zero coalition fall apart because it was big business for us.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it didn't matter what was happening to the people, because as all the energy prices went up, all the food prices went up and everything else along with.
You know what's also a big business? Getting people to have gender-affirming medical care, right? Once you can get them on that escalator of surgeries, right, they are going to need lifetime medical care. It's a huge moneymaker. And in fact, university hospitals that engage in transsexual surgeries, right, they will promote it as a huge moneymaker, right? You get them on that go around, right? You get them hooked into transsexual surgery, and then you have a lifetime of medical care that will needed to be provided for these deeply ill, deeply troubled souls. So green energy, great scam. Transsexual surgeries, gender-affirming care, great scam.
With it. So that's one of the things that I liked about today.
Awesome. So, Harold, you must have been bummed not being there.
Okay, let's get back to the commentary crew on immigration.
The states and localities have the power to manage or interfere with. So this is moving on a very, very fast track. And
we also have our first federal case from four attorneys general challenging the birthright citizenship declaration. Attorneys general from Washington, Oregon, Arizona, and Illinois have filed.
Right, and say with chiropractors, right, get you addicted to that crack, that short-term relief, right, and you can have ongoing client, ongoing patient for many, many months, years, great money makers. So the relief provided by chiropractic is only fleeting, but you get people addicted to that relief, and you might get them coming back again and again and again. But also the same thing with Alexander technique. So my understanding of the technique is that I want to transmit principles so that people can implement it for themselves. But there is a wonderful release from pain when a trained Alexander technique teacher puts their hands on you, locates your unnecessary tension, helps you to let go of unnecessary muscular holding patterns in your shoulders, in your back, in your neck. And it feels so good getting a good Alexander technique lesson that many people just get hooked on the feeling and keep coming back rather than learning to implement the principles for themselves. Hooked on a feeling. That should be the subtitle for this show.
Filed in federal court in Seattle, questioning whether the birthright citizenship executive order. So another piece of the puzzle moving quickly.
So can I tell a quick story and then ask you guys to respond to my idea about what is going on inside the sort of left liberal head? About 25 years ago, I was at 27 years ago, I was at a dinner party in New York City, at which there were many 20 people around the table, but there were mostly sort of like Democratic donor types at the table. The conversation came up about Hillary Clinton, who was running for the Senate in New York. And I said that aside from everything else I did not like about her, I found this very disturbing because it was like a kind of affirmation that Hillary and Bill had a devil's bargain, that she was going to back him, support him, and then the minute that she could find a way to seize independent power, she would use his standing, her standing, to do so by carpetbagging, coming to my state and running for office. And this guy across the table from me looked at me, absolutely like the color drained from his face, and he said to me, "You can't say that." And I said, what do you mean I can't say that? I just said it. So this comes to mind because there is about the response to Trump on immigration from the Denver mayor or whoever. You can't do that, and that Trump and having run on immigration as hard as anybody has ever run on any issue ever, and having poll numbers that show that 50, 60, 70%.
So I'm scrolling through latest tweets on the Cassidy Hutchinson story, and here's the background to the latest developments. We know that Liz Cheney contacted Cassidy Hutchinson through an encrypted app, probably Signal, and then as a result, Cassidy Hutchinson changed her testimony. The testimony she presented that was shown on TV, this was all highly worked, and it's all highly suspicious. And we haven't yet had a good deep dive into Cassidy Hutchinson, the exact nature of her relationship with Mike Meadows, the chief of staff, and various House Republicans, and how someone with no discernible skills, right, became effectively the White House chief of staff at age 24.
Of the American people, depending on how you ask it, have now come to the opinion that all illegal immigrants should be deported from the United States. All. I'm not saying some. I'm not saying, you know what, I really like my gardener. I want my, I need my grapes picked. They really make a wonderful.
Can I interrupt you?
Wonderful. Yes.
How many people have gardeners? Anyway, this is.
I don't know.
Christine talked about this yesterday about kind of the classism embedded.
Every Californian.
Every Californian. It's true. Every Californian, and a lot of people in Nevada, a lot of sort of like retirees in.
And here's another point I keep thinking back to, all right, with regard to the Washington Post article about how an aide to the Speaker of the House of Representatives warned him that if you subpoena Cassidy Hutchinson, all sorts of sexually explicit text messages by apparently Republican members of Congress seeking sexual favors from Cassidy Hutchinson might come to light. But here's the rejoinder. If there were any sexually explicit texts sent to Cassidy Hutchinson from GOP lawmakers, wouldn't you think that Liz Cheney and her cronies on the January 6th committee would have already released every single one, certainly during the 2024 election campaign?
Nevada and Arizona and places like that where gardening is difficult because they're deserts and you need to...
I think Abe is right. I think it's a Hollywood liberal thing. It's like, oh, my gardener.
Well, East Hampton.
Or an East Hampton liberal.
Cape Cod. Okay, I mean, these places, people have garden. They have these giant hedgerows, right, 10-foot high bushes that need to be constantly kept in order. Otherwise, your house starts looking like, the Addams Family mansion. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry to go with Gardner. That was maybe.
Well, but you're repeating the arguments that you hear from liberals opposed to Trump's immigration policy, and I think you hit on the key difference between what's happening over the past 48 hours and what happened during the 4 years of the first Trump administration, and that's public opinion. public opinion is now firmly on Trump's side on this issue. He campaigned on immigration both times. It is his signature issue, as you say. But when he took office the first time, we all recall, the public was against him. They didn't, even on the question of the wall, something that had enjoyed broad public support prior to 2016, the public turned against building the wall. Now, because of the failures of the Biden administration, Trump is enjoying the wind at his back as he embarks on this anti-illegal.
So I'm looking at Rolling Stone, which notes the Washington Post did not see any of the alleged sexually explicit text messages seeking sexual favors from Cassidy, Hutchinson, but they did review correspondence between members of the House of Representatives discussing the existence of these messages.
Legal immigration campaign. He also did close some avenues of legal migration as well. The asylum program has been halted. But there too, I think he'll enjoy some public benefit of of doubt, suspension of doubt here, and that's what Democrats haven't really reckoned with. This shift in public opinion that is now firmly on the side of Trump.
And there's also, I mean, he's got the Lake and Riley Act now on his desk to sign from Congress. And I really don't think the public opinion piece is settled in on the left, the sort of open borders left. And Matt's absolutely right to cite it. People will give him a lot of benefit of the doubt.
Look, people have tremendous influence on how others react to them, right? A woman who carries herself a certain way is much less likely to be solicited for sexual favors. If a bunch of Republican congressmen are soliciting you for sexual favors, there's probably a bunch of things that you have done to create the impression that you're there to dole them out. But this is how the New Republic is covering this story. The rampant, vile horniness of Republican lawmakers may stop them from getting a key witness on the stand in their sham reinvestigation of the January 6th insurrection. Look, if a woman is putting out the vibe that she's a slut, that she's willing to do favors in exchange for climbing the greasy pole, how is that vile to want to tap that? I'm asking for a friend.
Out, because if you, even when you see the reaction to the news stories come out saying, well, he's going to deputize marshals and other DEA agents to have enforcement powers for immigration, this is horrifying, and everyone sort of shrugs and goes, well, that's great. Actually, unlike this sort of existential wall building that he talked about in his first term, he's deputizing people. There's manpower now behind his actions, and things are happening quickly, and people see it on the news, and they don't mind it. And I think that's where the disconnect really is, not just with the sort of progressive elite left, but also with the media, who doesn't really know yet how to cover this story, because it is coming from several angles. The way they covered the Lake and Riley Act was interesting to me, because none of them wanted to talk about who Lake and Riley was and what had happened to her. And so that was actually a very good, and the fact that a couple of Democrats came across the aisle and signed onto that bill as well. So he should use each of these opportunities to remind the public, this is a serious issue. This is why you elected me. I'm getting things done from, starting at day one. And he'll lose I think he'll lose the birthright citizenship argument. I think he'll lose things here and there in the courts. But for now, he's kind of asking for forgiveness, not permission from the public.
Well, I mean, two things. One of which is birthright citizenship goes to an idea about what America is, what kind of country America is, as well as to precedent and what the 14th Amendment says and all of that.
Well, and the practical challenge, if you have an infant who isn't a citizen and two parents who are here illegally, everyone's going to get deported. Or if they are a citizen, what happens to the parents? I mean,
right.
Practical challenge.
I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying that there, even though it really does involve human beings and there's something abstract about it, it's more an argument about what America is in its third, as we approach its, triennial. I mean, the 250th birthday. I'm sorry. What we have here is that public opinion has changed because the facts on the ground inside the United States have changed. There was a crime wave in the United States beginning in 2020. Crime has gone up. Illegals are involved in crime. So are natural-born citizens who are apparently more likely to be criminals than illegal aliens who may want to not do so much because they don't want to get on the radar.
All right, so this is John Podhoretz. He's the editor of Commentary Magazine. The other people, Christine Rosen, and Matthew Continetti. He's on the upper right. Where is it? Here we go.
Of governments and things like that. But there is a crime wave, and people who are not in this country legally, when they commit crimes, there is some special quality to that. that Trump isn't just making up. And the problem is that
and that's Mr. Greenwald. He's the managing editor of Commentary.
2017, when he said, you know, they're destroying our country, or this is if you don't have borders, you don't have a country. That may or may not be true, but people did not feel, I think, the effects of immigration in terms of their feelings of existential.
That's Abe Greenwald on the lower left, executive editor, and Christine Rosen's on the bottom right.
Safety. A lot of people may have thought that jobs were being taken and that sort of thing, but something changed between 2020 and 2020.
The number of immigrants changed.
Well,
millions
and so the guy on the upper right, that's Matthew Continetti, who wrote The Right, a 100-year war for the 100-year war for American conservatism. So he leans towards the Matthew Buckley right, but he was admirably fair in the book overall to the paleocons.
Millions of people.
The largest amount since ever in our
history.
Yeah,
that's a change.
Literally a historic amount.
But if that had happened at a time of public peace, let's say, or, you know, like enforcement of the laws, people were there. That wasn't the case here, though you could say that was necessarily not the case, because not enforcing immigration law is a form itself of antinomianism that was going to have far-reaching consequences and might give people an idea that they were free to do whatever it was that they wanted to do. But the public does not feel safe. And when you start, and that is not a partisan opinion.
But that
is not partisan. Like, that's why 60-70% of the public now favors mass deportation, which is a pretty astounding shift over over a 20-year period, like something that probably 10% of people would have said they were for in 2005, and it's now 2025, and close to 2/3 of the American people say that there should be mass deportations.
For the liberals freaking out about it, they've gotten very, very accustomed to illegal immigration and border security problems. They've gotten very used to that as a topic to discuss, to argue over, to pontificate. It's an issue. The idea that you were supposed to do something about it has thrown them into a panic. The action is like the crazy. It's sort of like where we all are on, say, Social Security reform. Like when something happens.
Right. So that's Abe Greenwald, executive editor of Commentary magazine, or managing editor of Commentary. So we had a resurgence of fires in Los Angeles, and keep an eye on that. Also keep an eye on raids by ICE.
And this feisty Haitian gangbanger with 17 past criminal convictions. Watch.
I'm not going back to Haiti. Trump, you feel me? Yo, Biden forever, bro. Thank Obama for everything that he did for me, bro.
Harold, I wouldn't want to go back to Haiti either. But you gotta go.
I think the worst, again, just to repeat, I think the worst first part.
Biden forever. Thank you, Obama, for everything that you did. Biden forever. From some gangbanger with a dozen criminal charges. Thank God that we're getting rid of these people.
To that, it was never supposed. It was inconceivable that something's going to actually happen on it.
I think it's also because many of the people who are at the forefront of opposing the deportation policy, the wall policy, they're insulated from the effects of the open border from the past 4 years. So you think about it the same way that they've been insulated from the effects of the inflation. People, because the Democratic Party has realigned to this highly educated, or high levels of college attainment, they're not so educated in many cases, affluent party, they didn't have to feel the inflation in the same way that the middle and working classes felt the inflation. And when you have mass migration to the extent that we've had over 4 years, the affluent and protected don't feel the consequences. There was a report out about Fairfax County Public Schools yesterday. That's the school system where I graduated from at high school. It was known as the best public school system in the country when I attended. It's now running huge deficits because of the money it has to spend.
So Hamilton High School down Robertson Boulevard near the 10 freeway was one great high school back when Pico Robertson was a dominantly 95% plus white community, 90% plus Jewish community, and the local public school was a great public school. The neighborhood integrated, had forced busing, and Hamilton High School went to hell. We had an explosion of crime in the school, explosion of crime in the neighborhood, and we had a massive destruction in the academic standards of Hamilton High School, as the neighborhood and the public school went to hell, unfortunately, when we had busing. All right, back to the five.
Of a look is it for Barack and Biden, where Haitian gangbangers with 17 convictions are singing their praises?
I'm so happy he did it because Barack and Joe Biden earned it. They earned those accolades from this 17-time convicted Haitian gangbanger who is saying F the President of the United States. Look, it's about time. They were not only blamed by, the Republicans, but blamed even by this individual. CNN apparently, and I hate to even mention, they made a statement. They said, America is now more hawkish on illegal immigration as opposed to the way they were in 2016. That no, Donald Trump was prescient. In 2016, when Donald Trump was concerned about immigration, they said he was a xenophobe. They said he was a racist. But he knew what was at risk. He knew what was coming. And we weren't ready. We had to suffer for 8 years before we got to the point where America said, you know what, Donald Trump is right. And this is what Biden wanted, and this is what Obama wanted, and they never told us why. We know why. It's about power. It's about the Democrat Party. Because if there were a real refugee problem, first of all, they'd be showing up. The UN would be showing up. They'd be showing up for their asylum hearings. The bottom line is this. They did not care about the American people. They were more concerned about power. And now we've got ICE agents begging to get back to do their job. We've got people in apartment buildings yelling, thank you for getting these individuals out of this country and out of their neighborhoods.
I don't remember, Greg, in the last 4 years, ever seeing video of an ICE arrest. We just saw borders open and people waltzing through with their entire family.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, and I think the media, we should be very careful not to let the media frame this as a crackdown. It's not a crackdown, it's a correction.
Yes.
This is how normal life is. Illegal criminals in your country, you arrest them. And the idea that like somehow, it's great. I love this guy. 17 convictions. Yeah. If only Biden was here to pardon him. This is a blow to MSNBC because I think he was next in line for Joy Reid's spot. Mexico, by the way, is assembling these huge structures, right, to receive illegals, and they are worried that they won't suddenly be able to house them or care for them. But they're also worried they may be sounding like Donald Trump. And this is what is brilliant. It is, again, I said it in the A block, what was it B? Free money on the table. Let's get rid of the worst first. The Dems are like, hey, why didn't we think of this? Well, you stopped thinking. You replaced thinking with feeling, and you were wondering why they did this. It was because they were dictated by activists and moronic allies known as the media.
From a public relations standpoint.
Oh, I love that question.
Very clever for the administration to embed Mnuchin with ICE.
Look what I wrote, embed. Oh my gosh, we're all thinking the same way. So
thinking about Mnuchin in bed?
That's what you were thinking? That's what you were thinking. Unbelievable. I believe there are more... you can fact check me, whatever. But I do believe that there are more NYPD officers than there are ICE agents in the country. Yeah. So what they are able to do, they have to be super effective. And
okay, so just about a mile south of Beverly Hills is a community that's now known as La Cienega Heights. It used to be known as Corning-Cadillac, the literal names of streets, but then it was dominated by the Playboy Gangster Crips. So this neighborhood south of Beverly Hills, Pico Robertson, was predominantly white and Jewish through the 1950s. And in 1967 came the first seeds of integration. That's when you had the first black students coming from South Los Angeles bus to Alexander Hamilton High School. Suddenly you had an explosion of violence and the destruction of the school's academic quality. By 1972, half the school students were black. So it went from a school with no black students to half the school students were black. By 1980, 60% of the neighborhood's residents were black. You had an explosion of crime, of drugs, of dysfunction. The area's white residents, including most of its Jewish population, moved out. It was taken over by the rock cocaine trade. it was usually slung by black street gangs. So you had the development of wrought iron window bars, you had barbed wire going up around the neighborhood, as one gang in particular, the Playboy Gangster Crips, sold crack on Corning Street, controlled the surrounding blocks. 1987, there was an injunction developed just to stop this gang, the first of its kind in the country, and was the first of a series of crackdowns on crime in the neighborhood. What followed over the next 30 years was a gradual outflow of the neighborhood's black residents and influx of Latino immigrants who took their place. So when LA maintained a gang registry, half of young black men were found to be in a gang. So in the 1950s, Pico Robertson was 80% Jewish, and Jews would send their kids to Hamilton High School. It was one of the top public high schools in the city. And then you got busing of kids from South LA, and you had a dramatic decline in educational standards. So a left-wing criminology professor produced a book on the Pico Robertson neighborhood, Police Power and Production of Racial Boundaries in La Cienega Heights. So now Cadillac Corning is a predominantly working-class black and Latino immigrant neighborhood. It sits on the edge of the West Los Angeles police jurisdiction, which also includes some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country. So whenever you have a boundary, police will want to try to enforce that boundary to prevent the crime from going into the more affluent neighborhoods. So in 1997, Cadillac Corning was a site for the SARA, Scanning, Analysis, Response, and Assessment Model. It's a model of problem-solving police method which officers collaborate with neighborhood prosecutors, landlords, and community groups to fight crime, blight, quality of life offenses. The SARA method is now widely used by police departments nationally. So there are all sorts of crime-fighting techniques that developed just south of Beverly Hills. The neighborhood, once again, was overwhelmingly white in the 1950s and then became overwhelmingly black by the 1970s. And when it became black, it also started slinging crack cocaine and developed a horrible reputation as a dangerous place. In 2003, a blue sign went up at the intersection of Cadillac and La Cienega. The sign boasted the city seal of Los Angeles, the name La Cienega Heights. Right? The community voted to rename the neighborhood. They were hoping that a new name would rehabilitate the neighborhood's status. But the new veneer did not bury a reputation decades in the making. And apparently homeowners in the district have something of a prejudice against black people. They feel terrified of black crime. So the neighborhood used to be single-family homes when it was a white and Jewish neighborhood. But then when it became a black neighborhood, it became predominantly a rental neighborhood. So up until the late 1960s, the neighborhood was 90% white, 80% Jewish. Then became a black neighborhood. Property management companies began accepting Section 8 renters. Rental prices decreased. Tenants stayed for less time. You had an explosion of crime. You had people killed when they just came to the neighborhood just trying to buy some drugs. And the gang that they'd buy drugs from, they weren't always the best at accounting. And sometimes they felt like they'd been ripped off. When they hadn't been ripped off, they just didn't know how to count. 1973, the Los Angeles Times issued a 5-part special on Hamilton High School. The series portrayed Hamilton High School so negatively that white transfers surged after it was printed. The first article was entitled, Boredom and Tension Replace Golden Age. A special grief for the downfall of a white Hamilton High School. Once it was the very image of an all-American high school on the suburban fringes of Los Angeles. Now it is an urban high school, right? It's a black high school. With all the pressures and troubles which accompany that change in status. Apartment houses and homes surround the rear and 2 sides of the 21-acre campus. Veteran members of the faculty look back on that period and call it Hamilton's golden age when it was a white school and a Jewish school. Their memory is classrooms full of parent-prodded, anxious to succeed students who did not question a teacher's authority and who often bit off more work than they were even assigned. It was an exclusive prep school. But after the golden age, white teachers, students, and administration accused black students of bringing violence, drugs, conflict, and militancy to school. Los Angeles Times articles detailed white students' fears. Whites talk in apprehensive tones about being jostled in the halls, not using the bathrooms because they might be beaten or exhorted for loose change by blacks. White students tend to shun school dances and athletic events at night, largely because they or their parents fear violence at the hands of blacks. There are white students who stay away from school dances because blacks laugh at the way they dance. One coach, lamenting the problems he has getting some white boys to go out for sports, thinks the youngsters are not only unsure that they can measure up to blacks athletically, but are also fearful of them. That's so sad. Why do they have to be so racist like that?
And does she think that there should be tampons in the boys' bathroom?
No and no, I think. I try to tell her, Judge, that as a conservative, she raised me to have common sense, a work ethic, respect for all individuals. That message has...
Okay, let's get the introduction of this segment. Hey, come on, stop out. Don't give me bloody copyright.
New York Times is diving into the struggles of liberal parents who are having a hard time connecting with their Trump-loving kids. The headline saying, quote, "When your son goes MAGA," the article adding, quote, "Plenty see their son's embrace of Mr. Trump as an expected act of rebellion or a choice made by an independent young adult that they should respect. For others, it has felt like a painful rejection of the values they have tried to instill in their children." Now, Jesse, I couldn't start this without calling on you first.
All right, back to this left-wing professor. Teachers at Hamilton High School, the newly integrated Hamilton High School, after forced busing of kids from South Central Los Angeles, they struggle with educating a racially and socioeconomically diverse classroom. One Hamilton teacher commented, "It's not unusual to have a kid who is the son of a doctor and another who is from a family of 7 and does not know who his father is in the same class." Teachers complained that students were less willing to take commands and they exhibited more attitude. In 1970, Hamilton High School qualified for the first time as an inner-city school. As black students entered Hamilton High School in greater numbers, the school became more militarized. Suspensions and arrests of black students rose steeply. Black students complained that they felt as if they were in a prison. Los Angeles Times staff writer recounted the school's daily disciplinary routine. The signal that a security agent is needed is one bell sounded throughout the school by a control device in the school's main office. One hears it periodically during the day. It is an ominous sound. Everyone knows there's a problem, maybe trouble. 1978, Los Angeles Unified School District announced that no student could transfer to a school in which the student's racial group already made up more than 50% of enrollment. By 1984, minorities made up 78% of Hamilton's population. Parents threatened to sue the school district unless they investigated the number of students who had illegally migrated out of Hamilton to schools more west and more white. Parents said they would just enroll their students in private school rather than return to Hamilton. So the reason we had an explosion of Jewish schools in Los Angeles was after forced busing. Most Jewish parents didn't want their kids to go to racially integrated public schools. Jews moved west to escape the racial integration. And then in the 1980s, LA street gangs were exploding. And law enforcement tried to keep a lid on these problems by forming gang injunctions, all right? These are civil lawsuits against neighborhoods based on the claim that gang behavior is a nuisance to non-gang residents. Injunctions then restrict the movements of those labeled gang members. So if you're a gang member, you are not allowed to engage in behavior that is otherwise legal, including congregating in groups of 2 or more, standing in public for more than 5 minutes, wearing certain clothes, making certain gestures. They can be arrested if they engage in any of these activities. Luckily, LA has become much more woke, and we don't do these kind of restrictions anymore. By 2003, 47% of African-American men in Los Angeles County between the ages of 21 and 24 were on the Los Angeles County Gang database. Half of African American men in LA County between the ages of 21 and 24 on the LA County gang database. And LA's first gang injunctions were implemented in Cadillac Corning, otherwise known as Cadillac Heights. Right? It's not the area with the most murders and assaults, but it was on a boundary of more respectable white and middle and upper class communities. So Cadillac Corning was targeted for the injunction because it threatened geographic, racial, and class separation and control. Fear of black men and stereotypes about black families was central to the rationale for the injunction. The injunction was meticulously designed to control the movement of black bodies by criminalizing activities and behavior that is unremarkable and legal in other jurisdictions. So the injunctions were used to shore up racial boundaries. And then these injunctions were modeled all around the country. LA Time article was entitled, "Drug Peddling Street Gang Holds Neighborhood in Fear." Mentions the murder of a 14-year-old who was a gang member. The other murder covered was that of the white youth on the motorcycle. Drug buyers have also been robbed, raped, or gunned down. Late 1986, a 16-year-old involved in a business misunderstanding with a Playboy gangster drug dealer was killed by a lookout who, upon receiving a signal, stepped out of an apartment building and fired a gun as the youth drove off on his motorcycle. So the 16-year-old youth paid an honest price for his drugs, but the Playboy gangster drug dealers weren't able to add up money accurately, and so they thought he was ripping them off, and so they shot him. So wealthier whites from neighboring parts would enjoy Cadillac Corning as a convenient drug market. But after it garnered attention for several white drug patrons getting robbed and one was murdered, and that depressed property values. Today, Hamilton High School is essentially a two-track school. There's the original integrated school and two magnet schools. The magnet schools have larger percentages of white and Asian students, higher test scores, better college attendance rates than the predominantly black and Latino original school.
On ESL, on English as a second language, as a result of the migration. So the people, I'm going to wager, who are saying this is anti-humanitarian, this is cruel of Trump, we need to oppose what Trump is doing at every cost, I bet a lot of them send their kids to private schools. So they don't feel the brunt. And it's the same in housing. It's again and again and again. And it shows you the cocooning of the Democratic Party that's taken place over the past decade.
Can I just add, this is such an important point because it actually speaks to a broader theme throughout American history that I think we're seeing a resurgence of now. And that's that when your political class becomes an elite, and that includes the left and the right, when you have a lot of people in the political class who are elite and removed from the everyday life of ordinary Americans. I'm not saying every politician is, but in general, if you have an elite class, a technocratic elite, they forget how pragmatic the American people can be. And the idea that if there's a huge problem and the people vote in someone who's like, I have these three things on my list to take care of that as a solution, they're going to choose that person and they're going to set aside any qualms they have about any.
All right, Kip has some commentary. It says, without censorship, the left cannot win the war of ideas. Outfits like the New York Times still have a place in your Hot 40, but many have realized that their moral and intellectual authority is questionable. The left can't do the social media thing because the forum is too open. Trump's charisma is kryptonite to their progressive shenanigans. Left was fine when Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg were acting like lefties. Now they cry foul. It does not compute. How can Adam Carolla still have an ounce of respect for the sniveling Jimmy Kimmel? Debanking is way down the slippery slope of totalitarianism. What will we do when AI scans 40's podcasts before debanking us all because 40 spent over $25,000 on the Alexander technique? Once the AI catches wind that 40 puts those lessons on his credit card at exorbitant interest, all our gooses are cooked. Those are their best customers, same way the chiropractor does it. Customer for life. Liz Cheney. Democrats are scraping the bottom of the barrel when they hitch their wagon to her. Following a legend can be tough. Following Nick Saban, tough. Following Joy Reid, not so tough. There goes the neighborhood. Over half were without dads. Almost half joined gangs. Any connections? because it's so spread out. I bet LA has the most criminal activity of any U.S. city. It's #1 drug distribution hub. Walter Cronkite proclaimed my hometown, Chattanooga, was the dirtiest city in America. The Clean Air Act made the air better. But most of the 600 manufacturers left. Parents of Hamilton High probably put the additional burden on feeding their kids onto LA Unified School District 2. Yes, that's new. Now most public schools also feed the kids at least 2 meals. Feels good to know that we fed and raised these super predators.
Anything else. That pragmatism, that deeply rooted pragmatism, has been repurposed and called hate by the left. Oh, they hate immigrants, they hate people. And there are plenty of people who are racist and terrible. But most Americans have a very pragmatic approach to solving problems. It is what it's made our country very strong, less prone to revolutionary outbreaks, and more likely to get things done. And I think this should be a reminder to Trump that he needs to keep tapping into the pragmatic response that American people have rather than the more ideological response, because he'll get more done tapping into that pragmatism.
All right, that's a good point. What must happen to avoid having a fire tragedy like this in California again? All right, this guy nails it. He's an engineer.
Different approach in this video. Now, a lot of people are upset with various insurance companies, including State Farm, for non-renewal of coverage or cancellation of coverage for many homes in this area months in advance. And quite frankly, I'm not a big fan of insurance companies, but it's a business and people need insurance in most cases. So I think collectively, people need to figure out what it's going to take for insurance companies to offer coverage at the best possible rates in California, and not just try and impose these draconian measures, which I don't think is going to work. But really, this was the canary in the coal mine. People should have been asking, what do the insurance companies know that either the homeowners or the state of California officials apparently don't know? And the short answer is the insurance companies apparently told the state of California. I mean, there's a big insurance commission there that regulates the insurance industry in that state. And these insurance companies told them exactly what the issues were. Problems with water supply, a number of crews available who could do firefighting, lack of consistent and effective management of woodland areas, scrub, that sort of thing. And the other thing is, most of these homes were built decades ago in accordance with older building codes. So,
right, that's key. Right, that was a big flashing warning sign when you had insurance companies refusing to renew home insurance through the Pacific Palisades and other places that were particularly prone to the destruction of fires. Right, that was a big warning sign that LA needed to get its act together. Right, prices should act as communication, as signals about reality. But California does not have a free market in insurance. We have tried to use the political process, and we have an insurance executive in the state of California who gets to determine what prices insurance companies can pay. So we destroyed the free market, and so we destroyed the incentives that people should receive for maintaining their homes in fire-resistant manner.
So there's less protection relative to fire resistance in these older codes as compared to modern codes. And that's one of the aspects I'm really going to focus on here in this video. So let's just look at this area. This is the Pacific Palisades area. You can see the red outline and just see some images here of these fires, just really devastating. And one of the aspects that people have mentioned here, which is quite interesting, they've been talking about the vegetation that's caught on fire, and it's these blowing embers from the vegetation that get on these homes, and then a lot of the fuel for the fire then comes from the homes themselves. I mean, these are typically wood construction, wood frame homes, flammable siding, flammable roofs, flammable vegetation nearby the home. And you just see these scenes of complete devastation. So there's a current California building code, and of course this applies to new construction. Or if you have a big enough renovation to an existing home, then newer codes could apply. But in the codes, there's items that cover what kind of roof coverings you should have, what kind of exterior walls you should have, how you should create fire breaks with regard to vegetation around your home, and just making other aspects of the home flame and ember resistant. I just want to read this little excerpt here. For a house to qualify for fire insurance in fire-prone areas of California, it would need to meet specific criteria related to its construction materials, surrounding vegetation management, what they call a defensible space, and potentially additional features like fire-resistant roofs, ember-resistant vents, and properly sealed eaves, allowing insurance companies to assess the property as having a lower wildfire risk and therefore making it eligible for coverage. If the house doesn't meet these standards, it may only be able to obtain a policy through the California Fair Plan, which offers limited coverage at a higher cost. I think I've heard that the maximum coverage under the Fair Plan is maybe 60% of the home value. So let's look at these key factors that affect insurability for a home relative to fire risk. You've got construction materials, again, defensible space, ember-resistant features, and vegetation management. Seems pretty straightforward. And I'm not saying it's cheap to implement these measures, but look at the alternative. I mean, the hundreds of billions of dollars in property damage, the undoubted loss of taxes through decreased property values, impacts to businesses. I mean, the economic implications just magnify many times beyond just the actual property damage. And there's some features of the California Fair Plan here for insurance if commercial insurance companies won't provide coverage. You know, I live in an area that's got a nearby city that still allows cedar shake roofs. And I've got a modern composition roof on my home, and I still worry every 4th of July that some yahoo's going to shoot off a bottle rocket and have it land on my roof and have it catch on fire. I can't imagine living in an area prone to wildfires. So I think calling these types of events natural disasters implies, you know, an act of God or something that humans had no way to prevent or control, and that's just not true. Obviously, there are many things that governments and individuals could and should be doing to reduce these fire risks. And what's one thing that can be done? Using concrete roof tiles. This is better in terms of fire resistance than certainly any type of wooden roof or composition roof. You could use fiber cement siding. This is a demonstration of a fire that was set next to a house that had cement fiber siding, and you could tell it's just got scorched, but the material itself did not burn. So yeah, let's look at why these fires are so dangerous and why they spread so much. You know, you got these embers blowing around and they can be carried miles from the front of the fire. So here's a side-by-side comparison of, say, a house with wooden siding versus one with the cement fiber siding. I'll play that here. You see the embers blowing onto the house. And the non-protected side is quickly engulfed in flames. It's rather dramatic. Now, there's other systems that can be employed. These dousing systems are basically like lawn sprinklers, but for your roof and siding. And I understand some people had these installed on their homes in these Southern California fires, and it saved many of them. See here, it's not only covering the house itself with water, but also the vegetation within a distance of several feet of the home. So again, I am looking at this from an engineering perspective. Clearly, the insurance companies are better at assessing risks and pricing it than anybody in state or even federal government. So they should be listened to. They should be brought to the table and say, okay, go down the list of what you want to see so that you can offer insurance and hopefully at affordable rates for these fire-prone areas. It's not going to be enough to say that these companies are evil and they need to be punished. I mean, it's a business, and they made a business decision to not incur hundreds of billions of dollars in losses if they could help it. So again, it should be a huge red flag if they're not willing to provide coverage. What are the root causes and what can be done to eliminate or mitigate those concerns? Think of it like the Northridge earthquake. This was in 1994, January of 1994. It was a 6.7 magnitude quake. I was actually out there starting a couple of days after this earthquake to do a project in Southern California for several months, and I experienced some of the 5.2 and greater aftershocks. But it was interesting. I could go around and look at all these parking garages and other structures that were relatively modern, but were destroyed by this earthquake. So that was a real eye-opener, and engineers and building officials realized that there need to be changes in the building code, which they quickly implemented. Some of the scenes of the damage: collapse of highway sections, destroyed buildings, considerable devastation. But keep in mind, this did, in today's dollars, at most $100 billion in damage and kill 57 people. So these fires so far, they're not extinguished yet, have destroyed enough property. It's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars. And the latest death toll that I read was 27 people. So if you look at just the economic impacts of the Northridge quake and put it in perspective, these fires are going to have a far greater impact on the economy of California at the very least, if not the nation. And it's going to take months and years for any significant rebuilding effort to take place. So really, I'm thinking that the building code needs to change. There needs to be retrofitting of older structures that fall under older building codes. I mean, you look at the Francis Scott Key Bridge that was taken out last year. They're not going to rebuild it the exact same way. They're going to reduce the number of piers in the water so that there's fewer things out there that could get hit by a ship. They're going to move the piers farther away from the shipping channel. There's going to be much more effective pier protection, dolphins and that sort of thing. The dolphins were almost a joke at the Francis Scott Key Bridge compared to what you would typically expect would be needed for protection of an important bridge pier. And this last line here, design focus. The primary focus is to create a resilient bridge that can withstand potential ship collisions while...
Okay, I want to get this segment on Donald Trump challenging banks with regard to debanking conservatives.
Saudi Crown Prince offered to invest $600 billion in the U.S.
I'll be asking the Crown Prince, who's a fantastic guy, to round it out to around $1 trillion.
Delivering remarks to financial leaders in Davos remotely, the president singled out Bank of America's CEO, who was in attendance.
I hope you start opening your bank to conservatives.
Bank of America responded, saying they welcome conservatives and that they are, quote, required to follow extensive government rules and regulations that sometimes result in decisions to exit client relationships. We never close accounts for political reasons. The president is also shrugging off Elon Musk's claim that OpenAI CEO Sam Altman isn't good.
Okay, let's see what's going on here with Mark Halperin. What does he have to say?
Never talk about January 6th again. We'll see. It might come up tonight. There's a ton of news. It's the the third full day of the Trump administration, and as was true with the other days, there's just I could tell you 50 stories. We could go 2 hours without talking to anybody but my running monologue and not cover everything that's actually important and interesting. So we've done our best to kind of aggregate, curate what some things we think you should know, some videos we think you should see. Then the guests will respond, and we'll be off to the races before we get to your questions. So thank you again for spending some time with us. Donald Trump talked twice today. Once we knew was going to happen, his speech to the good people in Davos electronically, and then once in the Oval Office, another one of the executive order signings and running press conference. Same dynamic as the first two. Just sit there, sign something, take questions. Although this time the questions were less pegged to the individual orders. Big executive order on AI. David Sachs, the prominent podcaster and technologist and investor, was there, and he's the man in charge, at least for now, in dealing with these very complicated and important decisions about AI. The one that's getting the most attention is the full disclassification of the JFK, RFK, and Martin Luther King Jr. files. They're not released tonight. It'll be at least a couple weeks. There's a process laid out in the executive order for that, but that's getting a lot of attention. So I'll show you some sound from both events, both his address in Davos as well as the Oval Office address, and we'll talk about it. On Capitol Hill, the confirmations of the Trump nominees is still a big story. Donnie Radcliffe, the star of the Harry Potter films, was confirmed as secretary. Oh wait, I'm being told it's not Donnie Radcliffe, it's John Radcliffe. John Radcliffe, former congressman from Texas, was confirmed as the head of the CIA, 74-25. So not the Rubio 99-0, but not 53-47. So some number of Democrats, it's, not quite half of the Democrats voted to confirm him. On Pete Hegseth, there was a procedural vote to allow the nomination process to go forward, and 2 Republicans voted no, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. It had widely been assumed that they would vote no, but they hadn't said so. They'd been basically publicly undecided. They both put out long statements explaining their vote and similar reasoning, and nothing surprising there. If you followed this, they have concerns about his experience, concerns about some of the accusations against him, and to some of the things he's acknowledged both in his personal life and professional life. Some senators, like Senator Tillis of North Carolina, voted yes on the procedural vote, but Tillis himself publicly making it clear he's undecided on the final passage. So he could go down. If McConnell and Tillis vote no, he's not going to be confirmed. So we're continuing to watch that. Continues to be a lot of speculation about Kennedy, whose confirmation hearing was set for next week, finally, and Tulsi Gabbard, but no developments there. It's significant because, as the Trump people pointed out in December, when they were making the case that Hegseth was going to be confirmed, it's very rare for a senator of the president's party to vote on the floor against a nominee of that president. Hasn't happened very often lately. So we'll see what happens there. I told you this morning that we were going to look at the press conferences of Chuck Schumer and Congressman Jeffries. We looked at them. Not much happened in those. There's still a lot of discussion about whether the Democrats are going to negotiate on immigration, whether they negotiate on the debt ceiling, whether they're willing to negotiate over the aid to Southern California. Once again, as he has in the past, Congressman Jeffries, Leader Jeffries, said, no, we're not interested in helping you raise the debt ceiling in exchange for aid to California. So, one more news item. The Seattle federal judge, a Reagan appointee, a Reagan nominee, who had the first case testing the birthright citizenship executive order's validity, as expected, because everybody thinks every judge and justice who looks at this is going to say it's not consistent with the Constitution. He expressed great skepticism about this executive order's viability. He did a 2-week, what do you call that thing? Temporary restraining order. Thank you. 2-week temporary restraining order, although it doesn't go into effect, I think, for 4 weeks or so. So there'll be more arguments. But he said he doubts that the plaintiffs will fail, that he'll doubt that the administration will succeed on the merits. But, it's a whole long process. There'll be arguments there. In all likelihood, there'll be stays until it gets to the Supreme Court, would be my guess. Because to not stay it would be to create a lot of confusion for human beings, and they try to stay away from doing that. And all the judges and justices, almost certainly of their mind, are going to say, this will eventually be struck down, so we shouldn't rule anything that allows it to have an adverse impact on folks. All right. Let me just make sure I haven't skipped anything, except a bunch of videos that we're going to play for our guests. The Associated Press said they will call it Mount McKinley as opposed to Denali, which is what Donald Trump wanted, but they're not going to call it the Gulf of America. They made that decision. Can't tell you why. We'll talk about it with our guests. One other thing involving everybody's favorite topic, Elon Musk. Remember, if you are here on the two-way platform and you want to get in on the conversation, please raise.
All right. Yesterday afternoon, interesting discussion on Democrats delaying tactics far more than normal to prevent Trump getting his cabinet in place.
In any event, the Lake and Riley Act passed the House today, which will be the first bill passed under this administration. Donald Trump will, of course, sign it. So that's on that. On nominations, news there. John Thune, we talked about it this morning, is in a little bit of a staring contest with the Democrats, who are delaying, using the procedural ridiculousness of the Senate, delaying the confirmation votes. So John Thune is saying, you want to delay? As he said, we can do it the hard way or the easy way. He's currently still threatening to keep the Senate in all weekend so he can have those extra days to move these nominees along. And as administrations of both parties do, he's playing the national security card and saying, in particular, it's outrageous that the Democrats are holding up the men and women who would keep us safe if they were confirmed. The Fox News Capitol Hill reporter, Chad Pergram, is an excellent reporter. He breaks a lot.
Yeah, let's get back here to
the Diplomat, eating pistachios and long walks on warm beaches. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Gorman. Matt, welcome.
Good to see you.
Are any of those things true? Do you ever go to that restaurant, Le Diplomat? Is that what it's called?
Diplomat. It's a little overrated. I don't like pistachios, but I did get a new puppy, and she's in the other room crying her ass off right now.
Get off shit, last to run. How about that?
Changing jobs with the frequency of Larry Brown, as I said in the.
I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly what happened. $6,000 later, he's still alive. But I got to tell you, son, if it happens again, we're.
Foreman.
Confident.
Dan.
Solid.
The correct answer we were looking for was eventful. Okay.
The question is moot.
Yeah. All right. I could do this stuff in any order. Let's just start with Lisa Murkowski. I want to show you again. She put out a long statement explaining her vote. I want to show you a little video from Capitol Hill. Most of you know this. If you cover the White House, particularly post 9/11, post COVID, you can't just walk around. You got to be escorted everywhere. If you have a meeting with somebody, you finish the meeting, they escort you right back to the press area. Capitol Hill is a free-for-all. Even now, if you say today, you go up there with like a checklist and say, I want to talk to Congressman X, Senator Y, and ask them questions as a reporter, chances are you can do it. There's ways they can avoid it, but most of them don't. Wide open place. So poor Lisa Murkowski was subjected to this. Please roll number 2.
This afternoon.
Yes. There is a big vote this afternoon, or the initial vote on Hegseth this afternoon, and you will see my vote when I go to the chamber.
Do you have concerns about still?
Yes.
You do. What are those concerns?
I will articulate those later, and
all right, enough of it. You get the point.
You feel like you've got
so, guys, and we'll start with you, Matt. Why do this? Like, her life's gonna be miserable. If you go on social media now, all the main MAGA people are saying we're gonna primary her. Her career's over. She voted for the Biden nominees. She won't vote for Trump's. Why would Lisa Murkowski bring this on herself?
She doesn't care anymore. I mean, we forget about it. But what year was it? Was it 2010? The Joe Miller write-in primary? What was that?
Yeah,
sounds about right.
2010, Tea Party.
Yeah.
And they told people how to write it in.
Yeah. Pencils and bracelets, I believe.
Fantastic, dude. Yeah,
staring into political death and surviving gives you a newborn sense of confidence and freedom, right? Any other Republican in Alaska should be shaking in their boots. I mean, look at Dan Sullivan, right? It's never been a question whether Dan Sullivan's going to vote for Hegseth or not, right? But being able to survive that made her more outspoken, right? One of the more shocking ones I ever saw was Kavanaugh, right? Even when she didn't have to be the no vote. Collins was the one that was always a swing vote. She took the brunt and voted no. So I think it's the fact that we talk about confidence. She stared political death, survived it, and now it's an afterthought. So she doesn't really care anymore.
So, Mark, Trump was asked about Collins and Murkowski voting no on the procedural vote and making it clear they're voting no on the floor, and he kind of sloughed it off. He kind of was like, "That's expected, whatever." Will he eventually take out after them, or he'll leave that to his henchmen and women?
I have a general policy of not trying to forecast the actions of the unpredictable Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So how about yes and no?
Yeah. Okay. Dan, game this out with me. It seems to me like Tillerson and McConnell could vote no. So maybe they don't tip their hand until the floor vote, and then they pull a John McCain and they go out and they do this, and then it's over, right?
I keep having the image of John McCain doing just that and thinking it would be Mitch McConnell like starting this new Congress, the new presidency off with a real, FU. I don't know. I mean, I was wondering if they would do it today, but they obviously have remained mum. I don't believe McConnell has said anything other than just he's still waiting for information. So I agree with everybody. I mean, I think Murkowski, look, she was a thorn in his side in the first term, and she's still here, Yeah. And so if you're going to take her out, how many times can you threaten it and not do it?
And
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
The Trump-Collins relationship, to the extent there is one, I'm not saying there's like a friendship here, but Trump seems to understand where Collins comes from in a lot of respects. Like you look, there's reactionary stuff online, yes, but the smart Trump people know that you're never going to get a Republican for that seat. And so I remember having this argument with a Collins person early in the term. And I like when Trump was first elected in 2017, and I'm like, what's going to happen when it's healthcare reform and he gets on the phone and comes after you? And they weren't really that worried. And I could kind of see why now. He understands Collins in a different league than, say, Murkowski, McConnell, and others.
I got to say, the thing about this Trump 47, I do think is more adept at the process. And I'm not saying he won't make a mistake. I'm not saying he won't go after these people. But I do think that both on the staff side and on the principal side, they are more tactical, they are more strategic. I think he understands, like, I can imagine that he knows that throwing gasoline on this is not going to be very effective.
Yeah. All right, you guys give me thumbs up or thumbs down on this, and it kind of plays off of what Matt just said. Thumbs up or thumbs down, agree, disagree. Collins, when she disappoints the base, disappoints a Republican president, a Republican leader, kind of does it reluctantly, seemingly, like agonizingly. Murkowski seems to sometimes seem like she's enjoying it, right? Like she's doing it, right? Yeah, thumbs up from one person. You guys, other guys agree with me or no?
Yes.
All right, Mark.
I'm not sure if I'm gonna go
Sideways.
like this. I'm not sure about Collins whether that's an act.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, of course. Do you guys? But at least she doesn't.
Democrats would tell you it's an
doesn't
act
stick
for
in the
20
shit.
years.
Yeah.
Right. I'm very concerned. Very concerned. You know.
Yeah. All right. I'll leave it up to you guys. Vote. Show of hands. Do you want to do Davos sound bites next or executive order press conference? Who wants to do Davos? EO. EO. All right. Let's do EO.
Davos,
all right.
You know.
All right. So executive order thing. JFK thing. He's just, he's so into it. And I don't know why he's into it. He loves being part of history things. He's obsessed with history. But I don't know what's in this stuff. Nobody does. But let's play number 3 and watch for the little Bobby Kennedy Jr. reference at the end.
Ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years.
So Trump.
For decades.
Big one. Part of history, ladies and gentlemen. Decades.
And everything will be revealed.
It's like a reality show.
Yeah.
Now watch this.
Okay.
Watch when he holds the thing. Watch him hold the thing up like it's like a show and
Give that
tell.
to RFK Jr.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, let's have a look at the chat. Kip says, any word on the possible ending of the charade with Derek Chauvin? I believe he's been sentenced to life for murder. He's the one held legally responsible for the death of George Floyd. Releasing him needs to be done ASAP. Has 40 seen the 17-minute video? I have not. I don't have a strong opinion on Derek Chauvin. Remember Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle. The level of cringe in Seattle never ceases to amaze. I feel better when Donald J. Trump turns the tables, begins prosecuting liberals. 91 felony counts at a time.
Peak Trump. All right, guys, everybody, this is going to be like opening the Capone vault, right? This thing's going to be like
No, it's actually
bated
going to
breath.
probably have some stuff in it at least.
Yeah. I didn't mean the Capone vault in terms of anticlimax necessarily. I just meant in terms of anticipation. How do you think Trump will want this revealed? Will he do an event or will it just get posted online? What do you think?
Ooh.
Right?
I think this screams the New York Post.
Leaked to the New York Post?
Yes.
See, I think he might do an event with like charts, like blow ups of things.
Back and to the left. Back.
Yeah,
and-
exactly. I don't know. Mark, what do you think?
I
Just
don't
put
know,
online?
but what I do know, without betraying confidence, is that Trump staff says it's going to be at least 14 days because they want to meet with CIA and look at the stuff to see what there is, and that's his press staff. So there is stuff in there still. In 2021, I wrote about this for Politico a few times. Then at NBC in 2022. I was going to write about it in 2023, but it didn't work out. So I've been actually kind of very interested for a while in the JFK
So Mark,
files.
let me ask you, how many pages of stuff is either completely unreleased or redacted? Like are we talking about
I would have to go
thousands
through my old
but
reporting.
Is it thousands of words? Thousands of pages?
Thousands of words. It could be on the order that, like, it depends on what you define as a record, right? Like some records are very small and some are very big. Some records are entire documents, some are not. And so there's different definitions of those things. There is some stuff in there that is going to shed more light on the CIA's contacts with Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination, both in New Orleans, where Oswald came into contact with a CIA front group that may have sort of recruited him, and it was run by a very shady guy from my home, Miami, George Joannides, and who was running this whole operation. And there is some evidence that, you know, Joannides was in charge of the anti-Castro stuff. So you see where that conspiracy theory comes from. And this is the one conspiracy theory where the conspiracy might be true. We don't know what it is. The experts I've spoken to who are not insane generally agree or believe that if there was CIA involvement with criminal knowledge or knowledge that Lee Harvey Oswald was going to assassinate JFK, that they were rogue agents, but don't underestimate that there could have been involved. So also, to be clear, everything in the JFK files is probably not telling the entire story. There are other records that are not there. In 1992, the JFK Records Act was passed.
Okay, we're not going to find out anything stunning, I don't believe, on JFK, but let's get this update about what's going on in Australia. Hundreds lining up to sniff a particular flower.
At Curl Curl, Australia. One of the big stories there tonight, hundreds of people line up at a Sydney greenhouse, not to stop and smell the roses, but for an endangered plant reeking of gym socks and rotting garbage. The corpse flower blooms every 7 to 10 years. There are thought to be just 300 left in the wild and fewer than 1,000 in cultivation. But they stink. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight.
Okay. Bad dinkum.
As a result of the movie by Oliver Stone. And this is a great example of fantastic PR management by the CIA, because what the CIA did before the JFK Records Act was passed is it convinced everyone this guy was just a lone kooky gunman. After the Records Act was passed, over time, we discovered just how much the CIA was involved in suppressing information and misleading Congress. Sorry to sound like I got a tinfoil hat, but some really shady shit happened there.
Well, go ahead, Matt.
No, I mean, look, it's not every day that Donald Trump can make Rob Reiner happy. Rob Reiner is an amateur JFK sleuth, did a big podcast on this last year. Joannides came up a lot. I would love to see his reaction right now.
Yeah. So two things. One is you're confirming, Mark, with your expertise, what I suspected, which is the JFK files are only going to make the conspiracy theorists go crazier. It's not going to settle them down. I'm amazed at how little commentary there is, and I contributed to it by talking about JFK here. The RFK files and the King files could be more compelling because there's plenty of storylines there. CNN just is breaking that the settlement that Pete Hegseth paid to the accuser of
50 grand.
alleged sexual assault, 50 grand. Did they break that story or no?
They may have, but
DAP broke it.
I gotta say, man, like, this is a great example of how I hate the way in which we as the media cover things. Because this is a very complicated case, and so far the only person who's really sort of done it from a holistic point of view, although she has a very strong opinion, is Megyn Kelly. But when you read the police report about the case involving the woman who made the accusation, you just read the police report. A few things are clear. One, Pete Hegseth is shit-faced. And two, the woman isn't. Three, she decides to go to his hotel room late at night while she appears sober to everyone and he's drunk. You know, four, she goes back to her husband's hotel room where her husband is there, and he says she doesn't seem drunk. And then five, like a few days later, she's like, oh, I was sexually assaulted. And her version of events concerning her sobriety don't match up with the observations of her own husband. And this is why the police didn't charge. And then you see the headline or the lead of the AP story, he paid 50 grand to settle with woman who accused him of sex assault. Well, yeah, he did pay that money to shut her up because he was at Fox. It's the Me Too era. And that's just money he had to pay. This guy was making millions of dollars. I'm not saying Pete Hegseth is an angel. And I'm not saying this stuff shouldn't be covered. It should. But very often the way we write about these things, and in this case, I don't think it does justice to the facts at hand. And it's a difficult
100%.
thing to write about because there are a lot of critics out there who instantly call us like pro-rape for saying stuff.
Okay, that's a